Long before men carved cities from stone or raised their voices to the heavens, the gods shaped the earth. From their divine hands came mountains and rivers, forests and seas, each realm given its own spirit, its own secret heartbeat. And beyond the Pillars of Hercules, at the edge of the known world, there was said to lie a sacred island, vast, fertile, radiant beneath the eternal sun. The island was Atlantis, born not by chance, but by divine design. It was here that the god Poseidon, ruler of the seas, found love. The legends tell that Poseidon once wandered the mortal world and beheld a woman unlike any other, Cleito, daughter of the first men who lived upon that island before the flood of time washed away memory. Her beauty was not merely of the body, but of the spirit, serene as still water, fierce as the tide. Poseidon, enamored by her purity, encircled the hill where she dwelt with rings of land and sea, protecting her from the reach of men. And there, he built a palace of such splendor that it seemed to shimmer between worlds. From their union came 10 sons, demigods destined to rule the island. The eldest, Atlas, was given the heart of the kingdom and his name to the land itself. His brothers were granted domains across the fertile plains, each surrounded by walls of bronze and orichalcum that caught the sun's fire. Thus began the royal line of Atlantis, where the blood of gods mingled with the will of men. Under their reign, the island flourished like no other. Imagine it, concentric circles of water and earth spiraling outward, each connected by gleaming bridges and guarded by gates of silver. Great canals stretched toward the sea, where merchant ships sailed bearing grain, spices, and rare metals. At the island's center rose the Temple of Poseidon, a towering sanctuary of white stone and gold, where bulls were sacrificed and hymns echoed through halls of marble. The people of Atlantis lived in harmony, guided by divine law, their cities, adorned with statues, gardens, and towers that reached toward the stars. The Atlanteans mastered the elements. They harnessed the strength of the tides, built machines powered by flowing water, and learned to bend the earth to their will. Their wisdom was said to surpass that of any other people, for they studied the patterns of the stars, the rhythm of the seasons, and the hidden pulse of the world itself. To them, nature was not something to be conquered, but a sacred partner in creation. But as generations passed, the divine blood grew thinner, and the hearts of men began to turn from reverence to desire. The Atlanteans, blessed with abundance, hungered for more power, more land, more dominion. Their temples still gleamed, their harbors still sang with the sound of trade, but the purity that once defined them began to fade. And though Poseidon still watched from his throne beneath the waves, he could feel the tremor of change, the quiet shift from harmony to hubris. It was said that on the eve of their greatest festival, the high priest of Atlantis gazed into the sacred waters and saw a shadow moving beneath the reflection of the stars. A whisper passed through the city that night, carried by the wind, a warning that when the gods turn their gaze away, even paradise can drown. Atlantis was born of the gods, but it was still bound by the flaws of man. Its brilliance, unmatched and eternal, would soon draw the envy of the heavens, and from that envy, the first cracks in perfection would begin to form. There came a time when the light of Atlantis burned brighter than any flame known to man. The island stood like a jewel upon the sea, its towers of marble and bronze reflecting the sunrise, its gardens overflowing with life, its harbors echoing with the songs of sailors from distant shores. This was the Golden Age, when the Atlanteans still remembered the laws of Poseidon and ruled with wisdom rather than greed. The air itself seemed charged with vitality, as though the island were alive, breathing, dreaming, watching. At the heart of the city stood the Temple of Poseidon, a vast circular structure that shimmered with white, red, and black stones quarried from the island's depths. Its walls were lined with orichalcum, that mysterious metal lost to time, glowing faintly as though it held the fire of the gods within. Inside, colossal statues of Poseidon and Cleito stood side by side, carved from ivory and gold. Around them flowed sacred fountains that never ran dry, their waters said to heal, purify, and reveal truths to those deemed worthy. The Atlanteans were not only builders, but seekers of knowledge. They studied the movement of the heavens, the whispers of the wind, and the secret language of the earth. Scholars gathered in marble halls to debate philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. Poets sang of harmony between the mortal and divine. Their ships, sleek and swift, crossed the seas not merely for trade, but to learn, to explore the mysteries of lands beyond the horizon. Their cities sparkled with light and laughter, their people strong, graceful, and adorned in robes of bright linen woven with threads of silver. They understood the balance of the world, or so they believed. Every law of Atlantis was inscribed upon golden tablets and kept within the temple, to honor the gods, to live in truth, to share wealth with fairness. Crime was rare, for no one hungered, and no one was denied the right to live with dignity. The fields yielded endlessly, the mines glittered with ore, and the seas overflowed with fish. It was said that even the storms avoided Atlantis, parting in reverence when they neared its shores. Yet perfection is fragile. Beneath the shining surface, the seeds of change were already taking root. The younger generations, born into comfort, began to lose sight of the sacred balance. They saw their power not as a gift, but as an inheritance. The priests spoke of humility, of Poseidon's will. But their voices grew softer as the city's laughter grew louder. Gold became more precious than virtue, conquest more thrilling than wisdom. Still, the gods did not intervene, not yet. The island's beauty endured, its light touching every corner of the known world. Even distant kings sent envoys bearing gifts, seeking alliances or favor. Atlantis was not just a kingdom. It was an idea, a vision of what humanity could achieve when guided by both spirit and intellect. And though its people no longer knelt as they once had, the old hymns still drifted through the night air, soft reminders of a bond slowly fraying. From the heights of their marble towers, the Atlantean lords gazed upon their empire and believed it eternal. They could not see that their reflection upon the water was already trembling, rippling beneath an unseen storm. For in every story where men reach for the divine, there comes a moment when the gods turn their faces away. Atlantis, perfect and proud, was approaching that moment. As the centuries passed, the Atlanteans forgot the stillness of prayer and the voice of the sea that once guided their hearts. The sons of Atlas and their descendants grew restless beneath their gilded crowns, their minds filled not with gratitude, but with ambition. They looked beyond their shimmering walls and saw the lesser lands that surrounded them, the untamed coasts, the scattered islands, the distant kingdoms across the narrow seas. To them, these lands seemed like mirrors waiting to reflect Atlantis' glory. And so began the Age of Conquest. The Atlantean fleets were unmatched, vast armadas of ships crafted from timber stronger than iron. Their sails dyed in deep crimson and blue, their hulls adorned with symbols of the trident. Each vessel carried warriors trained from birth, clad in bronze that gleamed like the morning sun. They sailed under banners bearing the crest of Poseidon, believing their might to be divine while made flesh. Where they went, they brought not only trade and diplomacy, but dominion. The first campaigns were swift and bloodless. Small island tribes and coastal villages yielded willingly, eager to share in the prosperity of Atlantis. The Atlanteans built harbors, temples, and roads, teaching their subjects the ways of order and craft. For a time, it seemed that the empire's expansion was destined to bring light to the world. But as the years went on, the tone of conquest changed. The kings grew proud and cruel, demanding tribute not in gratitude but in gold, silver, and slaves. The great markets of Atlantis swelled with exotic goods, ivory from Africa, spices from unknown lands, gems pulled from riverbeds that glowed like captured stars. The priests, still bound by the old faith, warned of imbalance. They spoke of Poseidon's law, that to take without giving was to invite the sea's wrath. But their warnings went unheard. The kings sat upon thrones carved from crystal and spoke of destiny. "We are the chosen," they declared. "The world was made for us to rule." Their words echoed across marble halls lined with torches that burned without smoke, strange flames that never dimmed. Soon, their reach extended far beyond the Western Ocean. They sent expeditions into the lands of Libya and Egypt, their armies marching like storms across deserts and plains. They clashed with proud kingdoms that refused their rule and crushed them with overwhelming force. Cities fell and were rebuilt in Atlantean design, their temples rededicated to Poseidon. In the capital, celebrations grew ever more lavish. Golden chariots paraded through streets strewn with petals. Musicians played before fountains that shot wine instead of water. And beneath the laughter, beneath the feasts and music, the quiet pulse of corruption grew louder. It was said that on the night of the 10th emperor's coronation, lightning split the sky above the temple of Poseidon, a crack so bright it illuminated the ocean for miles. Then belief. It was an idea that transcended the need for evidence. In the modern age, when technology pierced the deep and satellites mapped the Earth's contours, the dream did not die. Divers scoured the ocean floors with sonar, chasing shadows that turned to stone ridges or coral reefs. The Bermuda Triangle, the Bimini Road, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, all became stages upon which Atlantis might resurface. Each discovery, real or imagined, fanned the same old flame, that beneath the crushing dark of the ocean, something ancient still sleeps. But perhaps, in our endless search, we reveal more about ourselves than about Atlantis. The myth endures not because it hides beneath the sea, but because it dwells within the heart of human longing. The desire to find what was lost, to rebuild what was broken, to believe that there was once a world more beautiful than ours, and that we might touch it again. The quest for Atlantis is the story of humanity's refusal to accept finality, our need to see meaning even in the ruins of our own making. So the waves continue to roll, and the story continues to echo. Somewhere between science and dream, between ocean floor and imagination, Atlantis waits, not as a city, but as a reflection of all we hope to find when we dare to look into the deep. If there was ever a real-world reflection of Plato's tale, many believe it was found not in the Atlantic, but in the heart of the Aegean Sea, in the ancient civilization of the Minoans. Long before Athens, before even the Trojan War, there thrived upon the island of Crete a people who built palaces of beauty and sophistication unmatched in their age. The Minoans, named after the mythical king Minos, were masters of art, architecture, and the sea. Their cities shimmered with frescoes of dolphins and dancers, their homes glowed with the warmth of red and gold, and their harbors hummed with the songs of ships bound for distant shores. It was a world both radiant and serene, seemingly untouched by. The high priest took it as a warning. "The heavens are watching," he whispered, "and they are not pleased." But the emperor only smiled and raised his cup. "Let them watch," he said, "for even the gods must bow before the sons of Atlantis." From that moment, a shadow began to fall upon the island's heart. The seas grew restless. The winds, once gentle, began to turn sharp. Yet the Atlanteans paid no heed. They built higher, richer, more defiant monuments, towers of gold that pierced the clouds, ships that could carry 1,000 men. Their empire stretched across the horizon, but their wisdom had sunk beneath the waves of pride. And somewhere deep beneath the ocean's calm surface, Poseidon stirred. The age of glory that had once defined Atlantis began to sour beneath the weight of its own magnificence. The marble towers still caught the dawn's first light, and the harbors still shimmered with fleets of unmatched power, but something intangible had begun to shift. It was as if the island itself sighed beneath the burden of pride. The old songs of harmony were forgotten, replaced by the clang of hammers and the laughter of kings who believed themselves immortal. The Atlanteans, once a people of the sea, no longer listened to its whispers. They had mastered the tides, or so they thought. But nature is patient in its vengeance. It began subtly, a tremor beneath the temples, small enough to be mistaken for the earth stretching in its sleep. Then came the storms, winds that tore the banners from palace walls and shattered ships against their own harbors. The priests gathered in silence, reading omens in the smoke of sacred fires. The visions they saw made their hearts tremble. Oceans rising, mountains splitting, skies aflame, the wrath of Poseidon himself. When the priests brought these warnings to the emperor, he laughed. "The gods are jealous," he said, his voice echoing through the crystal hall. "Let them roar and thunder, they cannot touch Atlantis. We are eternal." His courtiers clapped, his generals bowed, and the laughter of arrogance echoed across the marble city. Yet, outside the palace walls, the people began to murmur. Farmers spoke of crops that refused to grow, of wells turning to salt. Fishermen told of strange silences beneath the waves, no songs of dolphins, no flickers of silver schools. Even the sea seemed to withdraw its blessing. In the temple at the city's heart, the high priestess stood before the great statue of Poseidon. The god's eyes, carved from lapis and gold, seemed to weep as rain leaked through the roof. "We have forgotten you," she whispered, "and now you will remind us." She ordered that offerings be made, bulls cast into the sea, incense burned until dawn, but the ocean remained still, its surface gleaming like a mirror that reflected not devotion, but defiance. Then, one night, under a crimson moon, a voice was said to echo from the depths, not heard by the ear, but felt within the bones of those who listened. "You have stolen my dominion," it murmured. "You have raised yourselves to the heavens. Now you shall return to the depths." The priests fell to their knees, trembling. But when they carried the warning to the emperor, he dismissed it once more. "If the sea hungers," he said, "then let it feast on the weak." That very season, the empire began to fracture. Colonies across the known world rebelled, declaring independence from their distant masters. The once mighty fleets, spread thin across the seas, found themselves besieged by storms that came without warning. Ships vanished without a trace, swallowed by waves that seemed to rise higher than ever before. Merchants began to speak of omens, glowing lights beneath the surface of the ocean, whispers in the wind that sounded like the voices of drowned men. Still, Atlantis refused to see its fate. The rulers built higher walls, more temples, more monuments, desperate to prove their power even as their world crumbled. Each festival grew grander, each sacrifice more desperate. On the night of the final ceremony, lightning struck the golden dome of Poseidon's temple. Flames leapt into the sky, burning blue and white. And as the people gathered in terror, the earth groaned, deep, ancient, unstoppable. The priests wept, for they knew the gods had risen in judgment. The sea that had once carried their glory now waited, patient and vengeful, at the edge of the island. And beneath the rising thunder, Atlantis began to tremble. The final dawn over Atlantis rose with an uncanny stillness, a silence so profound that even the birds refused to sing. The horizon glowed faintly gold, as though the heavens hesitated to unveil the day. The streets, once alive with the hum of markets and the songs of sailors, now stood eerily empty. The fountains had ceased to flow. The air was thick with the scent of salt and smoke. In the palace of crystal and orichalcum, the emperor stood upon his balcony, gazing out toward the endless sea. It was calm, too calm, as if the ocean were holding its breath. From the temples came the slow tolling of bells, calling the faithful to one last act of devotion. The high priestess led her followers to the grand altar of Poseidon, her white robes stained with ash. Her voice trembled as she prayed, "Father of waters, ruler of storms, forgive us." But the wind carried her plea away, unanswered. The waters at the shore began to recede, pulling back farther than any tide in memory. Children watched in wonder as the seabed was revealed, coral glistening in the sun, fish flopping helplessly, ships stranded upon the sand. The elders knew what it meant. They screamed for the people to run, but it was already too late. The sea roared. It was not merely water that rose. It was fury, divine and absolute. Walls of water, higher than mountains, surged toward the city with a sound like the tearing of the world itself. Temples cracked, Towers swayed, and the golden dome of the capital shattered as the first wave struck. It crashed through the harbor, tearing ships from their moorings and hurling them inland like toys. Streets turned to rivers, rivers to oceans. In the chaos, the emperor fled toward the central sanctuary, clutching the royal scepter of Atlantis. Around him, marble statues toppled and mosaics splintered beneath the force of the trembling earth. "Hold the line," he shouted to his guards, but there was no line to hold. The palace floor split open, swallowing soldiers and courtiers alike. Fire erupted from the cracks, mingling with the roaring sea in a storm of steam and lightning. The high priestess, drenched and bleeding, climbed the steps of the altar one final time. She raised her arms to the sky and cried out, "If this is our end, let it be known that we were once the children of the sea." The wave answered, a wall of blue and white light that engulfed her and the temple in a single, blinding moment. When it passed, there was nothing left but silence and foam. The city was breaking apart. Bridges snapped, islands sank, and the once great rings of Atlantis collapsed inward, swallowed whole by the churning abyss. The sound of it, that deep, endless rumble, was said to echo for days, even as the last mountain peak slipped beneath the surface. For a brief instant, as the sun vanished behind the storm clouds, the light struck the highest spire of the capital. It gleamed like a dying star, and then it was gone. Those few who survived told stories of what they saw: glowing forms in the waves, spirits of the drowned rising like silver mist. Some claimed the gods themselves could be seen watching from the storm, their eyes sorrowful, their power absolute. The emperor's crown was said to have floated briefly upon the water before vanishing into the depths, carried away by the sea that had once obeyed him. When the storm finally ceased, nothing remained but an endless ocean. The place where Atlantis had stood was now a vast silence, a memory swallowed by time. But beneath those waves, beneath leagues of darkness and coral, some say the lights still burn. The streets still glimmer faintly, and the spirits of Atlantis walk forever, waiting for the day the sea will give them back to the world. And above them, the stars kept shining, indifferent witnesses to the fall of an empire that had dared to challenge the gods. Atlantis was gone, but its legend had only just begun. When the fury of the ocean finally subsided, the world above was changed forever. Where once there had been a radiant island kingdom, there was now only a vast, endless sea. The horizon stretched empty and quiet, as if the earth itself mourned what it had lost. Yet, among the wreckage of shattered ships and drifting timbers, a few souls clung to life, broken, scattered survivors of a world erased. These were the last Atlanteans, the bearers of memory, destined to wander the shores of strange lands and whisper stories of the city that the gods had taken. They washed upon the coasts of foreign realms, some to the west, where unknown lands lay beyond the sunset, others to the east, near the edges of Greece and Egypt. To those who found them, they seemed like spirits out of time, tall, fair, and sorrowful, their eyes haunted by visions of fire and water. They carried fragments of their civilization, small tablets of crystal, symbols of power, and relics of knowledge long forgotten by humankind. Some called them mad wanderers, others prophets. But wherever they went, they spoke of Atlantis. They told of its shining towers, its sacred laws, its fall from grace. And in the telling, the memory of their lost home began to weave itself into the myths of the world. In Egypt, they said, the Atlanteans became priests, keepers of secret wisdom handed down from before the flood. They taught men to build with stone, to measure the stars, and to honor the balance between heaven and earth. In Greece, their stories found the ear of philosophers, who turned the tragedy of Atlantis into a parable about pride and virtue. In the West, far across the ocean, some claimed they built new temples beneath mountains and jungles, waiting for the sea to release the rest of their kin. Whether these tales were true or born from longing, none could say. But in every corner of the ancient world, echoes of the Atlanteans seemed to linger, whispers of a people who had seen the face of the gods and survived. The survivors spoke of how the city had sunk not merely because of angered deities, but because the balance of the world had been broken. They told that Atlantis was built upon a source of power drawn from the very heart of the earth, a luminous force that sustained their civilization but, when misused, turned against them. They warned that the earth itself was alive, and that all greatness carries a shadow of destruction. "Do not build too high," one old survivor told a Greek sailor. "For the higher you climb, the farther you fall." His words would later echo in Plato's account, reshaped into the moral tale we know today. Yet, as the centuries passed, the line between memory and myth began to blur. The few surviving descendants of Atlantis faded into the peoples they joined, their blood mingled with the world, their language forgotten, their artifacts buried under sand and soil. Still, the dream of their lost homeland endured. The ocean became sacred to them, a vast grave that separated the living from the ghosts of their ancestors. Some believed that in their dreams they could still hear the call of Atlantis, the low hum of its crystal towers, the song of the waves over its golden streets. They swore that sometimes, when the moon was full and the sea was still, a faint light could be seen beneath the surface, like the beating heart of a city refusing to die. Through these wandering souls, Atlantis became more than a place. It became a lesson, a mirror for all of humankind. It was a warning carved into the bones of history, that even the greatest empires can vanish in an instant when wisdom is forgotten and power becomes pride. And yet, it was also a promise that knowledge, beauty, and memory can survive even the fall of worlds. The last of the survivors disappeared into legend. Some say they ascended into the stars, returning to the realm of their gods. Others say they built secret sanctuaries deep within mountains or beneath lakes, where their descendants still guard the old knowledge, waiting for the time when Atlantis will rise again. Whether real or imagined, their story lived on, passed from tongue to tongue, from dream to dream. And so, long after the city itself had vanished beneath the sea, the heart of Atlantis continued to beat, not in the ocean's depths, but in the minds of those who dared to remember. Centuries passed, and the story of Atlantis drifted like mist across the ancient world, a fading echo carried by sailors, merchants, and mystics. What had once been a memory of grief and awe became a fireside tale told by wandering priests and foreign traders. Kingdoms rose and fell. Empires spread across the seas that had swallowed the great city. And then, in the golden light of classical Greece, a philosopher named Plato listened to a whisper from the past, a whisper that would turn into one of the most enduring legends humanity would ever know. Plato did not stumble upon the story of Atlantis by chance. According to his writings, the tale was passed down to him through his ancestor Solon, one of the great lawgivers of Athens, who had traveled to Egypt centuries earlier. There, among the high columns and shadowed halls of Sais, Solon met priests who claimed to remember a war between ancient Athens and a powerful island empire that had existed 9,000 years before his time. The priests spoke of how Atlantis had once ruled vast territories, stretching even beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the narrow strait we now call Gibraltar, before it vanished beneath the sea in a single, fateful night. Solon had intended to bring the tale back and preserve it for his people, but it was Plato who finally gave it voice, weaving the myth into his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. To Plato, Atlantis was not merely a story, it was a parable, a mirror reflecting the soul of humankind. In his telling, the Atlanteans were once noble and wise, living in harmony with the divine laws of their father Poseidon. Their cities were rich and beautiful, their people disciplined and just. But as generations passed, their hearts grew proud, their ambitions boundless. They reached beyond reason, seeking to conquer the known world. In doing so, they turned away from the divine order, and the gods, seeing their corruption, struck them down. It was a moral tale, as timeless as it was tragic, the fall of a golden age through the decay of virtue. Yet even as Plato used Atlantis as allegory, his descriptions were so vivid, so precise, that the line between philosophy and history blurred. He described a land of concentric rings of sea and land, of canals that glistened in the sun, of temples plated in silver and gold. He wrote of vast armies, sacred laws, and a royal lineage that traced its blood to Poseidon himself. Readers could almost see it, a gleaming island kingdom rising from the sea like a crown. Whether Plato meant for his audience to believe it real or symbolic remains one of history's great riddles, but the world chose to believe. For Plato's tale came at a time when Greece itself was recovering from war and struggling to define its ideals. The myth of Atlantis resonated deeply, a story of lost perfection, a warning of hubris, and perhaps even a nostalgic yearning for something greater than the world around them. Some philosophers dismissed it as allegory. Others whispered that the philosopher had uncovered an ancient truth buried beneath centuries of forgetting. The more Plato's students pondered the tale, the more it grew beyond its author's intent. Over time, the legend escaped the philosopher's scrolls and took root in the imagination of generations to come. Historians tried to trace the ruins of its cities. Poets dreamed of its beauty. Sailors searched for its shores beyond the Western Sea. And mystics, centuries later, would claim that Plato had not invented the story, that he had remembered it. They believed that the soul of Atlantis still lingered in the collective memory of humanity, like a dream half forgotten upon waking. Whether a myth, a moral, or a memory, Plato's tale gave Atlantis immortality. Through his words, the lost city rose once more from the depths, not in stone or water, but in the realm of thought, where no tide could reach it. And in every age that followed, there would be those who read his account and felt a spark, a question that refused to die. What if it was real? From that spark, thousands of years of fascination were born. Explorers would set sail in search of it, scholars would debate it, and dreamers would build it again and again in their minds. For in the end, Plato's greatest creation was not a lost city, but an eternal mystery, a story that reminded humanity that truth and legend are often two faces of the same coin, gleaming together in the flickering light of history. Long after Plato's voice fell silent, his story lingered like a ripple across the seas. Generations later, explorers, scholars, and storytellers stared westward, wondering whether the philosopher had left a map disguised as myth. If Atlantis had truly existed, its bones must still lie somewhere beneath the water, beneath silt, coral, and time itself. Every strange island, every ruin swallowed by the tide, became a possible clue, an echo from a vanished world. Ancient writers soon joined the hunt. Strabo, the geographer, mused that the Atlantic once hid lands now lost. Posidonius, another thinker of the Hellenistic age, believed that the ocean could have consumed whole civilizations. Even the great Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder wondered about mysterious islands beyond the known world. Though they lacked proof, the idea of a drowned kingdom captured something deeper than curiosity. It awakened nostalgia, the sense that humanity had fallen from a forgotten golden age. Centuries turned into millennia. Empires came and went. New maps replaced old. Yet whenever sailors glimpsed lights dancing on a foggy horizon or heard thunder rolling across an empty sea, whispers of Atlantis returned. Medieval monks copying Plato's texts wrote careful notes in the margins, speculating where the lost city might lie. Later, when Renaissance explorers began crossing the Atlantic, the legend flared back to life. Some claimed that the newly found lands of the Americas were fragments of that ancient realm. Others swore that ruins in the Caribbean or along the coast of Africa matched Plato's descriptions. The Azores, the Canary Islands, even the Sahara Desert were all offered as resting places of Atlantis. Each generation found its own mirror in the legend. To mariners, it was a symbol of discovery. To philosophers, a lesson about pride. To dreamers, a promise that beauty once existed so perfectly that the world itself could not bear its weight. And as the centuries passed, the search became not only physical but spiritual, an inward journey through the depths of human longing for origin and meaning. When scholars of the 19th and early 20th centuries rediscovered the lost cities of Troy, Knossos, and Mycenae, hope surged again. If Troy, once considered pure myth, could rise from the earth, why not Atlantis from the sea? Expeditions set out with new technology, sonar and diving bells replacing parchment and compass. Some claimed to find evidence: submerged walls near Santorini, strange patterns on the ocean floor off Bimini, ancient structures hidden beneath mud and coral in the Mediterranean. Each discovery seemed to whisper, "We were here." Yet for every clue, there was doubt. Geologists explained that continents do not vanish overnight. Archaeologists warned that human imagination can carve Atlantis wherever mystery already dwells. Still, the dream persisted. Even scientists felt its pull, half ashamed of their fascination. The ocean itself seemed to encourage belief. Its endless horizons, its storms that erase all traces, its quiet depths concealing secrets older than memory. At last, Atlantis ceased to be a place and became an idea, a symbol of lost wisdom, of civilizations that rise and fall like the tides. Beneath all the theories and expeditions lies something more human, a yearning to reclaim what was once pure, powerful, and whole. Whether Atlantis lies beneath volcanic ash or only within the collective heart of humankind no longer matters. The search itself has become the legend. And somewhere, perhaps far below the dark waves, ruins may still rest. Columns encrusted with coral, mosaics glinting faintly in the cold blue light, the silence of eternity draped across a city that once dreamed of perfection. The sea keeps its secrets well. The final hours of Atlantis were not marked by a single sound or sight, but by a deep, trembling unease, a heaviness in the air that no one could name. The skies were still blue, the harbors still bright, but something in the wind had changed. Even the gulls had gone silent. Farmers in the fertile plains felt the earth quiver beneath their feet, while in the marble temples of Poseidon, the sacred fountains ran red with clay. The priests gathered in silence, their torches flickering like the last breaths of dying stars. At the great palace by the central hill, the emperor of Atlantis stood before a wall of polished orichalcum, a mirror of gold and flame. His empire stretched across seas and continents, yet for the first time, he saw cracks, not in the wall, but in his reflection. Messengers had arrived from the far provinces, floods swallowing coastlines, quakes splitting fortresses, lightning falling like fire from the gods. Still, he would not bend. "We are the sons of Poseidon," he declared. "No wave shall take us." His words echoed through the throne room, bold and hollow. Then came the sound, a roar from deep beneath the ocean floor, a sound so vast it silenced thought. The mountains trembled, the sea drew back, and the wind became a shriek. From the western horizon, clouds rose like black towers, shot through with lightning that glowed crimson and gold. The people of Atlantis ran to the temples, their cries swallowed by thunder. Fishermen abandoned their boats, staring at the ocean that suddenly seemed to vanish, leaving the seabed bare and glistening under a blood-red sky. Moments later, the sea returned. A wall of water, higher than the tallest tower, rushed toward the city with the fury of the gods themselves. It was as if the ocean, denied for centuries, had come to reclaim its own. The first wave shattered the harbors, splintering ships and sweeping markets into chaos. The second devoured the lower streets, dragging people, animals, and entire houses into the deep. The temple bells rang once, twice, and then no more. Lightning struck the royal palace, splitting its golden dome as fire cascaded down the marble stairways. The emperor fled into the storm, his crown lost in the flood. The priests of Poseidon raised their arms in vain, chanting words that dissolved in the rain. The city that had once challenged heaven now vanished beneath it. The earth itself seemed to mourn. Volcanoes erupted across the island, their flames painting the sky in hues of copper and ash. Rivers boiled, the air thickened with smoke. The once green plains turned to glass as molten rock poured from the mountains. And through it all, the sea kept rising, an endless tide of punishment and renewal. Some legends say that as the final tower sank beneath the waves, a single sound echoed through the storm, the mournful call of a conch shell blown by Poseidon himself, summoning his children home. Others claim that survivors fled in small boats, carrying fragments of their lost world to distant lands, to Egypt, to Crete, to the far western shores that would one day be called the New World. Perhaps they carried more than memory. Perhaps they carried knowledge, the last spark of a vanished civilization. When the storm ended, nothing remained. The sea lay calm once more, hiding the grave of an empire. The sun rose over empty waters, its light glinting off debris and drifting gold. The world moved on. But beneath the waves, in silence eternal, the city of Atlantis slept, its streets frozen in time, its statues staring upward through layers of silt and shadow, waiting for the day when the sea might speak again. And perhaps, if you listen closely tonight, beyond the whisper of your own thoughts, you can still hear the faint echo of that lost world, the hum of orichalcum, the chant of forgotten priests, and the sigh of the ocean that both gave and took everything. Centuries passed, and the name Atlantis became a whisper, carried through generations like the echo of a dream half remembered. The world changed. The great empires of Mesopotamia rose and fell. Egypt built its monuments to eternity, and Greece birthed the mind of philosophy. But in quiet corners of the ancient world, sailors still spoke of a drowned land beyond the horizon. They called it many names: the Shining Isle, the Lost Kingdom, the Realm of the Deep. To each who spoke of it, Atlantis was something different, a warning, a wonder, a wound. When Plato first recorded the tale, he claimed to have heard it from Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, who in turn had learned it from the priests of Sais in Egypt. They told him of a civilization greater than any known, a people blessed by the gods and corrupted by pride. The Atlanteans, drunk on their own power, turned their ambitions outward, seeking to conquer the Mediterranean, to enslave its nations, to rule both land and sea. And for their arrogance, the gods struck them down. Plato wrote of Atlantis not as history, but as parable, a mirror held to humanity's eternal struggle between wisdom and greed. Yet even he could not have foreseen how that story would ignite the imaginations of millennia. Through the ages, Atlantis became more than a lost island. It became a symbol of everything humanity longed for and feared. To some, it represented the pinnacle of civilization, a utopia of beauty, science, and harmony with nature, destroyed only by fate. To others, it was a cautionary tale, a reminder that no empire, however mighty, could defy the laws of humility and balance. The myth breathed through each retelling, reshaped by the desires of those who dreamed it. The Romans imagined it as a distant echo of their own destiny. The medieval scholars placed it alongside Eden, a paradise fallen through sin, and the Renaissance thinkers saw in it the spark of rebirth, the lost wisdom of the ancients waiting to be reclaimed. But myth has a way of surviving not through fact, but through feeling. Beneath its surface of stone and salt, the tale of Atlantis is a mirror of the human condition itself. We rise, we build, we conquer, and in our reach for perfection, we sometimes destroy the very ground beneath us. Atlantis is the memory of that cycle, of creation and collapse, of light consumed by its own brilliance. It is not merely the story of a place, but of a pattern woven into history's rhythm, an echo that repeats with every civilization that forgets its limits. In the hushed halls of libraries, philosophers debated whether Plato's tale was allegory or truth. In the shadows of candlelight, cartographers inked secret maps of the Atlantic, marking with trembling hands the place where the island might have been. Sailors returning from distant voyages spoke of strange ruins glimpsed beneath the waves, of pillars of marble deep in the blue. And so, the line between myth and memory blurred, until Atlantis became both legend and possibility, a ghost world lying just out of reach, where truth sleeps beneath imagination. Even now, beneath the hum of the modern age, the name holds power. We have not stopped searching. From the sonar sweeps of the ocean floor to the jungles of the Yucatan, from the volcanic ridges of Santorini to the frozen sands of Antarctica, the question endures: was Atlantis ever real? Or is it the voice of something older within us, the yearning to return to a time before the fall, when humankind still walked close to the gods? Perhaps that is the true legacy of Atlantis, not a city lost to time, but an idea eternal, a memory that does not fade, but waits within every dream of paradise, every empire that believes itself immortal, every story that begins with wonder and ends with silence. For in the depths of the ocean, and in the depths of our own hearts, the past never truly dies. It only drifts deeper until the tide of curiosity brings it once again to the surface. As centuries rolled forward, the waves did not quiet the name of Atlantis. They seemed to guard it, whispering it to every new generation that looked upon the sea with wonder. The legend stirred something deep within the human spirit, an ache for discovery and remembrance. It called to philosophers, to poets, to explorers whose hearts were stirred by mystery more than map-making. The story of a lost civilization, swallowed by the sea yet rich in wisdom, became both a question and a quest, a riddle that humanity could not let rest. During the Renaissance, when the old world met the new, the myth of Atlantis was reborn. Scholars like Francis Bacon dreamed of Nova Atlantis, a vision of a perfect society guided by science and moral virtue. Artists painted islands bathed in golden light, their marble towers rising above a serene ocean, untouched by decay. Yet even as they imagined paradise, sailors and adventurers turned myth into mission. The Portuguese, the Spanish, and the English all wondered if their ships might stumble upon the remnants of that ancient empire, hidden somewhere across the endless blue. In the age of exploration, when the world's horizons expanded and maps grew crowded with new names, the shadow of Atlantis lengthened. Some believed it lay beyond the Azores. Others thought it was buried beneath the sands of the Sahara. A few whispered of strange ruins found beneath the waves near the Caribbean, pillars and stone steps, as if the ocean floor itself remembered. The myth became a compass, guiding those who longed for meaning beyond the known. It was less a place to find than a promise to pursue, a glimmer of the divine woven into the salt and foam of the world's great unknowns. And as science advanced, the mystery only deepened. In the 19th century, with the rise of archaeology and geology, new theories bloomed like coral across the sea of imagination. Some saw Atlantis in the volcanic island of Santorini, shattered by a cataclysm that might have inspired Plato's tale. Others traced its echoes to Crete and the Minoans, whose palaces of Knossos spoke of grandeur and sudden ruin. The Victorians, fascinated by both faith and reason, began to see in Atlantis the missing link between myth and memory, a civilization that bridged prehistory and the dawn of man. Writers, too, kept the fire alive. Jules Verne, H.P. Blavatsky, and later, Ignatius Donnelly, whose Atlantis, the antediluvian world captured the Victorian imagination, argued that the lost continent was the mother of all civilizations. They painted vivid worlds where Atlanteans harnessed crystals, commanded energy, and built temples that touched the heavens. For some, these stories were fantasy, for others, prophecy. And even as scholars dismissed them, their allure persisted, proof that Atlantis had become something greater. The violence that shadowed much of the ancient world. From their capital at Knossos, the Minoans ruled not by sword, but by trade and diplomacy. Their ships glided across the Mediterranean like living creatures, carrying olive oil, wine, and pottery to Egypt, Anatolia, and beyond. Their artists painted scenes of nature and ritual that spoke of harmony, of reverence for the sea and for life itself. Unlike so many other early civilizations, the Minoans seemed to thrive without fortresses, without vast armies, only with skill, wealth, and an unspoken balance with the world around them. To later generations, their peace, their prosperity, and their sudden disappearance would echo with the haunting rhythm of Plato's lost empire. For centuries, the Minoans were a whisper in the stones, forgotten beneath layers of earth and legend. Then, in the early 20th century, British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans uncovered the sprawling ruins of Knossos, revealing corridors of painted walls, storerooms filled with jars, and intricate plumbing systems that spoke of genius far ahead of their time. What he found was not the savage labyrinth of the Minotaur, but a sophisticated and vibrant civilization that seemed to mirror the virtues Plato ascribed to Atlantis: wealth, beauty, and a deep connection to the sea. But the Minoan story did not end in splendor. Around 1600 BCE, the island of Thera, modern Santorini, erupted with unimaginable fury. The explosion was so great it shattered the island, sent waves towering across the Aegean, and darkened the sky for miles. The seas that once carried the Minoans' ships turned violent, their harbors swallowed by ash and ruin. For years, the world dimmed beneath the veil of volcanic dust. When the skies cleared, the once great palaces of Crete were abandoned, their halls empty, their frescoes fading. Some survived, scattered, but their golden age had ended. To some, this was more than coincidence, it was evidence. Could this cataclysm have birthed the story of Atlantis? The parallels are tantalizing. A radiant island civilization, flourishing and wise, destroyed suddenly by the wrath of nature. The Minoans' fate, buried under layers of pumice and time, seemed to carry the same warning that Plato's Atlantis had told, that even the greatest societies can crumble when harmony is broken and the gods are defied. Yet, even in ruin, the Minoans spoke. Their art, their symbols, their architecture whispered not of arrogance, but of grace, a civilization that sought balance, not domination. Perhaps, in their end, we see not a punishment of the divine, but a reminder of the fragile beauty of creation. The sea that once sustained them turned against them, and yet in that turning, it preserved their story, their legacy, their reflection in the myth of Atlantis. Today, when the sun sets over the cliffs of Santorini, painting the caldera in crimson and gold, the air feels thick with memory. Beneath those waters lie the remains of a shattered island, a lost world whose echoes reach across millennia. Whether Atlantis ever existed or not, the Minoans remind us that behind every legend is a truth, and behind every truth is the yearning of humankind to understand its own fragility. Theirs was a real Atlantis, a civilization brilliant and doomed, forever suspended between myth and history. When the philosopher Plato first spoke of Atlantis, he did not describe it as a fantasy, but as a memory, an echo of something half-remembered, told to him through his teacher, Solon, who had heard it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. Plato's dialogues Timaeus and Critias wove the tale of a grand and virtuous empire that once stood beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the straits we now call Gibraltar. Atlantis, he said, was an island realm greater than Libya and Asia combined, blessed by the gods with fertile lands, abundant resources, and a noble people. They were descendants of Poseidon, lord of the sea, and their capital shone with rings of land and water, temples of gold and silver, and walls that gleamed like fire in the sun. But behind Plato's magnificent imagery lay not just a story of splendor. It was a moral vision, a parable wrapped in myth. To him, Atlantis represented the eternal struggle between human virtue and human pride. Its people, once just and wise, began to hunger for power. They conquered lands, enslaved nations, and filled their temples with treasures. Their hearts, once pure, turned arrogant. And so, the gods, seeing their corruption, unleashed the earth and the sea against them. In one terrible day and night, the island of Atlantis vanished beneath the waves. To Plato, this was not a legend to entertain, it was a warning. His Athens, the city of reason and democracy, stood as Atlantis opposite, a society built on moderation, order, and balance. The fall of Atlantis was meant to remind humankind that no civilization, no matter how advanced, could stand forever if it turned away from justice and the harmony of the soul. The grandeur of the Atlanteans, their temples and fleets, their power and beauty, all were nothing when pride consumed their virtue. In their destruction, Plato saw a mirror of human history itself, the rise and fall of empires born from brilliance and undone by greed. And yet, it was the details of his description that captured the imagination of generations to come. He wrote of mountains rich in metals, rivers that sparkled with gold, elephants that roamed freely, and a capital city arranged with geometric perfection, rings of canals, bridges, and gleaming towers that rivaled the beauty of Olympus itself. To the Greeks, who had seen the ruins of Troy and Mycenae, such descriptions did not sound impossible. To them, Atlantis might have been a forgotten truth, a story preserved from an age before memory. For centuries, philosophers and poets debated Plato's intention. Was Atlantis a parable of virtue lost, or was it an ancient recollection preserved through myth? Even in his lifetime, some accused him of invention, of using allegory as philosophy. Yet, the power of his words transcended doubt. The image of the island's fall, the earth trembling, the waves rising, the temples shattering, became etched into the collective mind of humanity. It was more than myth. It was the echo of a truth that all civilizations carry within them, that greatness, unchecked by wisdom, leads inevitably to ruin. Through the ages, readers have found in Plato's Atlantis the reflection of their own times. The Romans saw it as a reminder of luxury and decline. Medieval scholars pondered its connection to biblical floods. Renaissance explorers, guided by maps and dreams, sought its shores across the Atlantic, believing that perhaps, somewhere, its ruins still gleamed beneath the sea. Every generation reinterpreted Plato's warning in its own image, yet the essence remained unchanged. That power without virtue is a seed of destruction. Even now, as we drift in the soft glow of modern light, Plato's words whisper through time. His vision was not simply of an island lost, but of humanity itself. Our endless cycle of creation and collapse, our yearning for perfection, and our inability to hold it. The story of Atlantis endures not because it was real, but because it feels true. It touches something ancient within us, the knowledge that even the greatest wonders can vanish in a single night, and that wisdom, not power, is the only anchor against the tide. As centuries drifted by like waves upon forgotten shores, the legend of Atlantis refused to fade. Plato's words, preserved and studied through the ages, became a spark that lit the imagination of scholars, mystics, and explorers across the ancient and medieval world. For many, Atlantis was not a myth, but a mystery, an echo of truth buried beneath oceans or lost to the sands of time. The question lingered in every curious heart: what if it really existed? During the age of the great Greek geographers, men like Strabo and Posidonius pondered Plato's tale, wondering if the island lay beyond the known seas. They debated whether Atlantis was swallowed by the Atlantic, or if it might be found in lands known to them, the Azores, perhaps, or the western coast of Africa. To the Egyptians, who spoke of ancient floods and kingdoms before recorded time, Plato's story resonated like a memory half remembered. And to the Romans, who saw their own empire rising in splendor, the warning of Atlantis felt eerily prophetic, a mirror of hubris reflecting their fate to come. When Europe fell into the long twilight of the Middle Ages, the legend of Atlantis slumbered, whispered only in old manuscripts and the quiet musings of scholars who dared to dream. Yet even then, the sea remained a symbol of the unknown, and the minds of men never stopped reaching for what lay beyond. As monasteries copied Plato's works by candlelight, they kept alive the faint glow of that lost civilization, a promise that somewhere beyond the edge of the maps, the remnants of a forgotten world waited to be found. Then came the Renaissance, the rebirth of knowledge, the awakening of curiosity. The old texts of Greece returned to Europe's scholars, and Plato's words struck the minds of thinkers anew. Philosophers in Florence, adventurers in Lisbon, and cartographers in Venice all began to speak of the Atlantean lands. The world, once small and mysterious, began to open again. And as ships set sail into the Western Ocean, guided by stars and faith, The dream of Atlantis sailed with them. When Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic, he carried not only the banner of Spain, but also centuries of speculation. Some said he sought the Indies. Others whispered he sought Atlantis itself. As the Americas emerged from the mists, many believed the mystery had been solved, that the new world was, in truth, the old world rediscovered. Writers and theologians rushed to link the ancient myths to these newly found lands, believing that Plato's vanished kingdom had risen once more beneath foreign skies. In the following centuries, the obsession deepened. Explorers and scholars proposed countless theories. Some claimed Atlantis lay beneath the waves near the Azores. Others pointed to the Canary Islands, whose volcanic peaks rose like remnants of sunken mountains. Visionaries looked to the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, even the icy expanses of Antarctica. Each theory reflected the spirit of its time, part science, part hope, and always wonder. In the candlelit chambers of Europe's thinkers, the mystery grew. The more men sought Atlantis, the more it slipped through their fingers. But perhaps that was the power of the tale, to inspire rather than to be solved. Atlantis became not just a lost city, but a symbol of longing, for the perfection humanity could dream of, but never hold. Every explorer who braved an uncharted ocean, every philosopher who pondered the limits of knowledge, was chasing that same invisible shore. The myth wove itself into maps and manuscripts, into poetry and prophecy. The name Atlantis came to represent the unreachable, a golden age of harmony and wisdom, swallowed by time, but alive in the soul. And so, across generations, the search continued. Each new age rediscovered Atlantis in its own reflection, a place of lost greatness, a reminder of our fragility, and a whisper of what might once have been. As the candle burns low and the waves of time lap softly at the mind, imagine those dreamers standing on the decks of their ships, staring into the endless horizon. They were not merely searching for land, they were searching for memory. For Atlantis was never only a place, it was a question. And like all great questions, it waits not to be answered, but to be imagined. As centuries turned and the maps of the world grew ever more complete, the oceans themselves became the final frontier of the imagination. The more the explorers charted the edges of the earth, the more they began to look inward, to the vast, uncharted depths beneath them. The legend of Atlantis, whispered in the halls of scholars and carried on the lips of sailors, drifted into a new realm, the mysterious deep, where light fades and memory sleeps. In the 19th century, when science began to claim dominion over myth, Atlantis refused to vanish. Instead, it adapted. Writers, archaeologists, and adventurers began to look for evidence, tracing the old words of Plato like a map written in code. They pored over his description, an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules, larger than Libya and Asia combined, rich in metals and resources, ruled by kings who wielded both wisdom and arrogance. And they asked themselves, could the sea truly hide something so vast, so grand? With the age of steamships and underwater exploration dawning, a new breed of seekers emerged. In 1882, Ignatius Donnelly, a congressman and dreamer from America, published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. His book revived the legend for a new era, claiming Atlantis was the mother civilization from which all others descended. Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Americas, all children of the same lost world. His words spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the myth of Atlantis became not a relic of ancient philosophy, but a story of global origins, a forgotten chapter of human history waiting to be rediscovered. Others followed Donnelly's path, weaving science and speculation together. Some looked to the Atlantic, mapping the mid-ocean ridge and imagining the drowned peaks of a vanished continent. As new technologies probed the ocean floor, ridges, plateaus, and strange formations stirred old imaginations. The Azores Plateau, the submerged city-like structures near Bimini, and mysterious ruins off the coast of Cuba. Each discovery reignited belief that perhaps the sea was still guarding its secrets. Beneath the waves, the earth keeps its silence. The ocean floor, vast and dark, has swallowed empires, forests, and mountains over millennia. To those who listen, the currents seem to murmur old names, civilizations lost to storms, to earthquakes, to the patient pull of time. Scientists explain these shifts as natural, the slow movements of tectonic plates and rising seas. But storytellers and dreamers still see the hand of Atlantis in every underwater ruin, every lost coastline. In the 20th century, explorers with sonar and submarines ventured deeper than any before them. They mapped the abyssal plains, found volcanic scars where continents once met, and traced the ancient shapes of long-vanished islands. The myths seemed to linger just beyond their reach, a shadow beneath the currents, a promise beneath the pressure. Some claimed that these underwater formations near the Canary Islands or the strange terraces beneath the Caribbean might be the remnants of Atlantis. But always, proof dissolved into mystery, as if the sea itself refused to give up its ghost. Yet Atlantis persisted, not in the realm of evidence, but in the imagination. Scientists searched for data, but humanity searched for meaning. The drowned city became a metaphor for our lost pasts, our forgotten wisdom, our fear of destruction. It was the mirror we held to the sea, reflecting both our brilliance and our downfall. And as we learn more about the power of nature, of volcanoes, floods, and shifting continents, the legend of Atlantis began to feel less like fantasy and more like memory. Perhaps some began to wonder, Atlantis was not one place, but many civilizations swallowed by time, scattered across the world's oceans. Each a fragment of a larger truth, that nothing built by human hands lasts forever. In the stillness of the ocean's depths, that truth echoes endlessly, a silent hymn to impermanence. As you drift in thought, picture those deep, blue abysses, silent, cold, eternal. Down there, beneath the crushing weight of water and centuries, lie the secrets of the earth, untouched and unseen. Whether Atlantis sleeps among them or not, one thing remains certain: the sea remembers everything. Across the vast tapestry of human memory, there are stories that seem to rise and fall like the tides, told in different tongues, painted on cave walls, carved into stone, and whispered by firelight. Among them, the story of a great flood, a vanished land, and the fall of a once great people echoes again and again. Long before explorers charted the seas, these stories drifted across continents, as though humanity itself carried the same dream or the same warning. The legend of Atlantis is only one voice in this ancient chorus. Others came long before, and others followed, all sharing the same haunting melody of loss and rebirth. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a man who meets Utnapishtim, survivor of a cataclysmic flood sent by the gods to cleanse the world of human arrogance. Utnapishtim's tale mirrors the story of Noah, both men chosen to preserve life, both witnesses to divine wrath. And in those ancient waters, we glimpse the same current that runs through Plato's tale, the rise of pride, the fall of nations, and the cleansing of the earth by flood. It is a rhythm older than memory itself. Far to the east, in India's sacred texts, the god Vishnu warns the first man, Manu, of an impending deluge that will drown the world. In China, legends speak of Yu the Great, who tamed the floodwaters that once swallowed the land. Among the Aztecs and Maya, myths recall cities destroyed by the gods when men grew too arrogant, too close to divine power. And in each of these tales, from the deserts of Babylon to the jungles of Central America, humanity survives, carries the story forward, and rebuilds. Always the same pattern: greatness, hubris, destruction, remembrance. It is as if the earth itself speaks through these myths, as if memory, like the ocean, has layers. The philosopher Joseph Campbell once said that myths are the dreams of humanity, shaped by our fears, our hopes, and the quiet knowledge that nothing lasts forever. Perhaps Atlantis was never just a city, but a symbol of the cycle that defines us all: the rise from the unknown, the reach toward greatness, and the inevitable return to dust. When Plato wrote of Atlantis, he said it was destroyed not by accident, but by divine justice, a punishment for the Atlanteans' pride and corruption. It was a warning to Athens, to Greece, to all of humanity. But it was also an echo, one that resonated with older voices that came long before his time. He may have drawn upon the half-remembered whispers of older civilizations, of floods, earthquakes, and cities swallowed by the sea. Perhaps these were not mere stories, but distant memories, passed down through generations, reshaped with each telling until they became myth. Modern scholars debate whether these parallels are coincidence or proof of a shared origin, some forgotten event at the dawn of history, when the world changed and entire peoples vanished. They point to the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers raised the seas and drowned coastlines, erasing evidence of early human settlements. Could the memory of that time, of land swallowed by rising tides, be the root of every flood myth we know? Could Atlantis be the collective dream of humankind, remembering the world before the waters rose? In that possibility lies something profoundly human. We tell stories not just to explain what was, but to give meaning to what we fear might happen again. The tale of Atlantis, like the flood of Gilgamesh or the Ark of Noah, speaks to our longing for balance, the fragile harmony between our creations and the forces that sustain them. And though ages have passed, though cities have crumbled and new empires risen, we remain haunted by the same truth, that every civilization, no matter how great, is only one tide away from silence. As the waves whisper against the shore, imagine all those forgotten worlds, the ones we know and the ones we've lost. Beneath the rolling blue, in the eternal hush of the deep, their stories continue, carried in the rhythm of the sea. Listen closely, and you may hear them still, the voices of gods and mortals alike, echoing through time, reminding us of what it means to rise, to fall, and to begin again. For thousands of years, humankind has searched for the lost kingdom of Atlantis. Some chase it in dusty libraries, tracing the fragile ink of Plato's words. Others seek it beneath the waves, listening for whispers in the dark. From the moment the story was told, it became more than myth. It became a map, a riddle etched into the mind of every explorer who ever wondered what secrets still lie buried beneath the sea. But the question remains, did Atlantis ever exist? Or is it a reflection of something deeper, something within us? The earliest seekers believed that Atlantis lay where the sun set, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, now known as the Strait of Gibraltar. To the ancient Greeks, that narrow passage marked the end of the known world. Beyond it stretched the endless ocean, vast and unknowable, where monsters and gods were said to dwell. It was there, Plato claimed, that a mighty island once thrived, larger than Libya and Asia combined, its people gifted in science and art, its temples gleaming with gold and orichalcum. Yet, in a single night, the sea swallowed it whole. To many, this was enough to ignite centuries of curiosity and obsession. In the Renaissance, as the age of discovery dawned, explorers like Columbus and Magellan read Plato's tale as prophecy. The new lands they encountered across the Atlantic seemed to breathe life into the myth. Could the Americas be the remnants of Atlantis? Some believed the Maya or Aztec civilizations were its descendants, bearers of a lost wisdom carried across the waves. Others looked northward to the Azores, imagining stone ruins hidden beneath the surf, cloaked in coral and time. And still others turned to the Mediterranean, convinced that the truth lay closer to home. One of the most compelling theories points to the island of Santorini, ancient Thera, where around 1600 BCE, a volcanic eruption tore the island apart in an explosion so vast it reshaped the Aegean world. Entire cities vanished beneath ash and sea, and the sky darkened for weeks. Archaeologists uncovered the buried city of Akrotiri, preserved like Pompeii, its murals bright and haunting, its architecture advanced beyond its age. Could this have been Atlantis, a real civilization destroyed in a single night, its memory woven into Greek myth? The parallels are striking. A powerful maritime people, rich in art and technology, lost to the sea by nature's wrath. Yet the sea holds other candidates. Off the coast of Spain, near Cadiz, underwater researchers have found circular patterns of stone, echoes of Plato's description of Atlantis' concentric rings. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar scans have revealed geometric structures on the seabed, sparking claims of a sunken city older than known history. In the marshlands of Dinana, Spain, satellite images show strange formations resembling drowned ruins, buried beneath layers of silt. Each new discovery renews the hope that Atlantis was more than a fable, that one day, the ocean might give back what it took. But even as evidence remains elusive, the search continues, not merely for a place, but for understanding. To find Atlantis is to search for the origin of civilization itself, to ask where knowledge began and how it was lost. Every stone found, every myth compared, every dive into the deep is a step closer to that ancient dream. Perhaps, though, the true power of Atlantis lies not in discovery, but in its mystery. It compels us to look both outward and inward, to explore the sea and the soul alike. It reminds us that every ruin, every story, every unanswered question connects us to something larger, a shared longing to remember where we came from. The ocean may guard its secrets well, but the human spirit never stops listening. And so, from the scholars of Athens to the divers of the modern age, from Plato's ink to the glow of sonar screens, the search endures. The waves rise and fall over silent stone, the sand shifts, and the deep hums with memory. Somewhere beneath that endless blue, perhaps Atlantis still waits, not as a city of gold, but as a symbol of our endless desire to rediscover what time has taken and to understand what it means to lose and to dream again. Long before the world knew the names of Greece or Rome, before ships dared to cross open seas, there was said to be a vast island empire, Atlantis. The Atlanteans, as legend describes them, lived in harmony with both nature and the divine. They were a people born of the sea and sky, descendants of gods who mingled with mortals, their veins pulsing with ambition and wonder. Atlantis was not merely a kingdom, it was a world unto itself, a shining heart of civilization, glittering beneath the sun like a jewel set upon the ocean's crown. At the center of their island stood a great capital ringed by water, concentric circles of land and sea, connected by bridges of stone and shining metal. The outer rings were vibrant with life, bustling markets, ships loading exotic goods from distant shores, and gardens heavy with fruit and flowers that never withered. The middle ring held vast fields where farmers worked with tools of bronze and iron, guided by stars and seasons known to them through ancient wisdom. And at the very core stood the sacred temple of Poseidon, god of the sea. Its pillars of orichalcum gleamed red like fire in the sun, and the walls shimmered with silver and ivory. Within it, an eternal flame burned, symbolizing the divine spirit that bound the Atlanteans to their oceanic world. Their cities were marvels of design and power, streets paved in marble, towers crowned with crystal domes that caught the light of dawn. Canals crossed their lands like veins of living water, carrying ships deep into the heart of the island. The Atlanteans mastered engineering long before others dreamed of it. They harnessed the tides, built aqueducts that sang with the rhythm of the sea, and constructed mighty harbors where fleets rested like sleeping leviathans. Their walls, tall and glistening, were said to be unbreachable, not from fear of war, but to symbolize the perfection of their world, a balance between order and strength. Art and knowledge flourished like twin flames. The Atlanteans studied the stars, charting the heavens with instruments lost to time. Their philosophers pondered the soul and the structure of the universe. Their poets sang of the gods who had gifted them wisdom, and their sculptors captured life in forms so perfect that they seemed ready to breathe. Music echoed through temples and courts, not the wild rhythms of battle, but the serene harmonies of a people who believed themselves favored by the divine. Yet beneath this brilliance, a shadow stirred, the quiet murmur of pride. For in their mastery, the Atlanteans began to believe they were untouchable. Their empire grew beyond the horizon, reaching distant lands, establishing colonies where the sun never set on their influence. Their ships, black against the dawn, sailed to every corner of the known world, trading gold, tin, and wisdom with nations that would one day become myth themselves. To those beyond their borders, Atlantis seemed immortal, a paradise that defied time. But paradise is fragile. The more the Atlanteans achieved, the more they hungered. They began to conquer rather than trade, to rule rather than guide. The temples that once echoed with prayers of gratitude now rang with the voices of those demanding more land, more wealth, more power. The gods, it was said, watched in silence as their chosen people drifted from balance into arrogance. The flame of Poseidon still burned, but its light no longer reflected purity. It shimmered with the restless glow of ambition. Even then, the beauty of Atlantis remained unmatched. At sunset, the golden domes glowed like embers against the darkening sea. Children played beside the fountains of crystal, lovers walked through gardens of silver lilies, and philosophers debated the fate of worlds beneath towers of gold. But fate, as always, was listening. Deep within the ocean, something began to stir, a tremor, faint and distant, like the heartbeat of a slumbering god. The sea, which had once cradled Atlantis, began to remember its power. And though the Atlanteans could not see it, the tides of destiny were turning. The Golden Age, radiant and eternal, was nearing its final dawn. The end of Atlantis did not come suddenly, though the stories say it vanished in a single night. It began as all endings do, quietly. The winds shifted, the air thickened, and the sea grew restless. Birds fled the coasts, their cries echoing across the harbors. Farmers found the tides creeping higher each dawn, licking at their fields as if the ocean itself hungered for the land. In the great temple of Poseidon, the high priests whispered of omens, cracks in the marble, statues weeping salt water, the sacred flame flickering blue. The gods, it seemed, had turned their gaze away. For generations, the Atlanteans had prospered under divine favor. But pride had taken root, coiling through their hearts like a serpent. Kings who once ruled with wisdom now spoke only of conquest. The people who once prayed for harmony with the sea now sought to command it. Why should gods rule us? They whispered in shadowed halls, when we have become as gods ourselves. In that moment of arrogance, the covenant between mortals and the divine began to fracture. It was said that Poseidon, guardian of Atlantis, wept when he beheld what his children had become. The city he had once blessed had grown decadent, its towers reaching toward the heavens in defiance. The temples built in his honor were now gilded in greed, filled not with humble offerings, but with the spoils of conquest. The god's sorrow turned to fury, and from the depths of his realm, he called upon the other deities, the ancient powers that governed the balance of earth, sky, and sea. Together, they decreed the punishment of Atlantis. On the final night, the sky burned red as though the sun itself had fallen. The winds howled like beasts unleashed from the underworld, tearing at ships and shattering stone. Lightning split the heavens, and the mountains trembled. In the city's heart, the golden dome of Poseidon's temple cracked open like an egg of fire, casting shards of light into the storm. The people screamed prayers to silent gods, but no mercy came. The sea, once calm and blue, rose like a living wall. They said it began with a sound, deep, low, and endless. A roar from beneath the earth. The ground itself groaned and split apart, swallowing gardens, houses, and temples whole. The sea rushed in, devouring streets, extinguishing flames, drowning songs mid-verse. The mighty ships of Atlantis, symbols of their dominion over the oceans, were tossed like leaves upon the waves. Mothers clutched their children as towers collapsed around them. Priests clung to idols that could not save them. Above it all, thunder rolled like the laughter of gods. Within hours, the glory of Atlantis was undone. The marble palaces, the crystal bridges, the gardens of silver lilies, all vanished beneath the black water. The light of the sacred flame was snuffed out, replaced by the shimmer of lightning reflecting on endless waves. When the morning came, there was no island, no city, no trace of its people. Only the vast, silent sea stretching to the horizon. The sun rose over calm waters as if nothing had ever been there. Yet, they say that the ocean remembers. On quiet nights, sailors tell of strange lights flickering beneath the waves, golden glows that dance like distant fires. They whisper of voices carried on the wind, songs in a language no one knows. Some claim that when storms rage, the ruins of Atlantis rise from the deep, shimmering for a heartbeat before vanishing again. Others believe the Atlanteans survived, hidden in another realm beneath the sea, waiting for the world to be worthy of their return. But whether real or myth, Atlantis endures, not as a place, but as a warning. The Atlanteans reached for perfection and fell beneath the weight of their pride. Theirs was the greatest of civilizations, undone not by enemies, but by their own desire to rival the gods. The waves that swallowed their empire did not erase them, they immortalized them. Beneath every ocean, in every ruin and legend, the spirit of Atlantis whispers still, what is built in arrogance will drown in its own reflection. When the waves finally calmed and the fires were gone, all that remained of Atlantis was memory, a memory carried like a seed through time. The survivors, if there were any, vanished into the mists of myth. Some say a few Atlanteans escaped before the final storm, sailing east toward the dawn, finding refuge in distant lands. They became strangers with strange knowledge, builders of cyclopean walls, founders of forgotten kingdoms, bearers of divine wisdom. Across the Mediterranean, whispers spread of a vanished island, empire whose people taught the secrets of stone, astronomy, and the stars. In Egypt, priests of Sais told tales of an ancient people beyond the Western Sea who once defied the gods and perished in a single day. It was from these priests, according to Plato, that the story first reached Greece, a tale passed down for 1,000 years, carried by the sands and retold in marble halls. To the philosopher, Atlantis was not merely a legend, it was a mirror. He told it as a warning, a parable of hubris and decay. A society that once stood for virtue and wisdom, he said, had fallen into corruption, and by divine justice, it was wiped away. To Plato, Atlantis was the echo of a truth older than time, that power without morality leads to ruin. But even as philosophers debated its meaning, others wondered if Atlantis had truly existed. Herodotus wrote of lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules, where the ocean was vast and uncharted. Sailors returning from distant voyages spoke of islands glimpsed and lost in fog, of ruins beneath the sea, of strange inscriptions carved into coral and stone. As the centuries passed, each age reshaped the myth to its own imagination. The Romans believed Atlantis to be a land of golden virtue that once rivaled their own. Medieval scholars linked it to biblical floods and divine punishment. Renaissance dreamers saw it as the cradle of human knowledge, a forgotten Eden waiting to be rediscovered. The myth of Atlantis became a bridge between worlds, between history and dream, faith and reason. It stirred something deep within the human spirit, the longing for lost perfection, for a time when gods walked among men and wisdom was pure. For some, Atlantis represented mankind's highest potential, for others, its greatest folly. And as the centuries turned, this duality gave the story life, a heartbeat that never faded, echoing through philosophy, alchemy, and art. When explorers set sail during the Age of Discovery, they carried the myth with them. They searched the coasts of Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas, convinced that the ruins of the lost city lay somewhere beneath the waves. Maps from the 16th and 17th centuries bore names like Insula Atlantidis, the island of Atlantis, drawn in careful ink upon the unknown. Some thought it had sunk near the Azores. Others claimed it lay beneath the sands of the Sahara. And every discovery, every strange ruin, every artifact without origin, was hailed as a piece of that eternal puzzle. Through it all, the story endured not because of proof, but because of what it meant. Atlantis became a reflection of of our endless desire to understand where we came from and how easily greatness can fall. It spoke to the fragility of civilization, to the balance between progress and pride. For in every empire that rises, in every city that reaches for the heavens, the same question lingers like a shadow. Will we too one day become a legend beneath the sea? The philosophers said Atlantis was justice made manifest. The poets said it was a dream too beautiful to last. And yet, somewhere in the vastness of the ocean, perhaps the stones of that lost empire still rest, their columns wrapped in coral, their halls filled with silence. The sea keeps its secrets well, but it never forgets. So when you gaze out upon the horizon, when the water glimmers with the light of a dying sun, imagine that far below, in the deep blue quiet, a forgotten city sleeps. Its towers are veiled in shadow, its gardens grown with seaweed and pearl. And in the hush of the waves, the ghosts of Atlantis still whisper of what once was, and what might be again. As time moved forward and empires rose from the ashes of others, Atlantis refused to die, not in ruins or relics, but in the minds of those who believed that myth and truth were separated only by the tides. From the age of parchment maps to the whir of steamships, explorers carried with them a single question: where did Atlantis fall? The earliest seekers of the lost city were not driven by greed or glory, but by wonder. Medieval scholars scoured the works of Plato, reading each phrase like a coded message. Beyond the pillars of Hercules, he wrote, and that phrase became a compass. The pillars, they knew, were the narrow straits of Gibraltar, where the Mediterranean spilled into the great Atlantic. If Atlantis lay beyond, then somewhere west, across the endless blue, rested the bones of a drowned empire. When Columbus sailed into uncharted waters, there were those in Spain who whispered that he sought not a new world, but an old one, that he followed the memory of Atlantis across the sea. In his journals, he wrote of strange islands that seemed to rise from the mist and sink again beneath it, as if the ocean itself were teasing him with ghosts. Others, after him, swore they had seen ruins deep beneath the water, marble gleaming faintly in the dark. In the centuries that followed, the legend drew dreamers from every corner of the world. In the Renaissance, scholars like Francis Bacon wrote of a utopian island called Ben Salem, inspired by the idea of a lost, enlightened civilization. The Age of Enlightenment did not kill the myth, it revived it. Scientists, theologians, and mystics gathered to debate whether Atlantis had been real or merely symbolic. Some traced its remnants to the Canary Islands, believing the peaks that still rose above the sea were once the mountains of that ancient realm. Others looked to the frozen lands of Antarctica or the jungles of Central America, convinced that time and tectonics had hidden the truth. But the search was never just about geography. It was about identity. Every culture that heard the story tried to make Atlantis its own, a lost origin, a forgotten home. The Celts saw it as Avalon, the Greeks as a fallen rival, the Egyptians as a shadow of their own sacred lands. The deeper scholars searched, the more the myth seemed to move, like a mirage, shifting on the horizon. By the 19th century, with archaeology emerging and science illuminating the ancient world, the story of Atlantis gained new fuel. Ignatius Donnelly, an American politician turned visionary, published Atlantis, The Antediluvian World in 1882, a book that captivated millions. He claimed that all ancient civilizations, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Mayans, were descendants of Atlantis. To him, the lost city was not a fable but the mother of all empires. His words sparked a wave of obsession that echoed into the modern age. The ocean, once feared as a boundary, became a library of secrets waiting to be read. Submarines dove into the deep, sonar beams mapped the ocean floor, and every shadowy ridge or plateau was scrutinized for traces of stone or column. In 2001, explorers thought they had found it, strange geometric structures off the coast of Cuba, deep beneath the Caribbean. Photographs showed what looked like pyramids, stairways, and avenues, an underwater city lost to time. But like every discovery before it, certainty dissolved into speculation. The sea had spoken again, but only in riddles. And still, people searched. Because Atlantis was never just a place, it was a promise. The promise that there was once a time when humanity reached beyond its limits, and that perhaps, buried beneath the silt and coral, lies proof of a forgotten greatness. Even today, from satellite images to deep-sea drones, the question persists like a heartbeat beneath the waves. What if it's still out there? As night falls and the ocean turns to ink, the waves whisper over the graves of 1,000 lost ships. Somewhere beyond the reach of light, in the quiet depths where sunlight never touches, perhaps the stones of Atlantis still stand, cold, ancient, and waiting for the world to remember. As the centuries passed and human curiosity turned from the spiritual to the scientific, the myth of Atlantis did not fade. It transformed. What once was a divine parable became a question for geology, archaeology, and oceanography. Could the Earth itself hold the memory of that ancient cataclysm Plato described? A land swallowed by the sea in a single day and night? The story was too vivid, too precise to be dismissed as pure invention. And so, the search for Atlantis entered a new age, one ruled by science, yet still haunted by wonder. Plato's description in Timaeus and Critias had always been detailed, almost unnervingly so. He spoke of concentric rings of land and water, of canals engineered by a mighty race, of temples gleaming with precious metals, and of mountains rich with minerals. He wrote that Atlantis had existed 9,000 years before his own time, far older than any known civilization. To skeptics, this was the evidence of allegory. To believers, it was proof that Plato had preserved an echo of prehistoric truth. In the early 20th century, scientists began to explore the Earth's restless crust, uncovering signs that entire continents could indeed rise and fall over time. The theory of plate tectonics, still forming in the scientific imagination, hinted that land masses were not fixed, that the ocean floor itself could shift, fracture, and devour islands whole. Some began to wonder, could Atlantis have been a real island, one that met its end in a massive geological event? The Aegean Sea offered one of the first real clues. On the island of Santorini, known in ancient times as Thera, archaeologists uncovered the remains of a Bronze Age civilization buried under volcanic ash. Streets, frescoes, and pottery lay preserved as though frozen in time, victims of a cataclysmic eruption around 1600 BCE. The disaster had shattered the Minoan civilization of Crete, sending tsunamis across the Mediterranean. Here, many said, was the true Atlantis, a flourishing maritime society, lost to the fury of the earth. Yet, as compelling as Thera was, it did not fit every piece of the Platonic puzzle. Plato's Atlantis had been larger, grander, and lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, far out in the Atlantic Ocean. Other scientists turned their attention westward. In the Azores, strange underwater formations were found, leading some to speculate they were man-made ruins. Off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas, divers discovered massive rectangular stones, what came to be called the Bimini Road. To some, they were proof of a sunken city. To others, natural formations shaped by the sea's slow patience. The rise of oceanography in the mid-20th century expanded the search even further. With sonar and submersibles, humans could finally see what lay beneath miles of crushing black water. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a vast mountain range running through the heart of the ocean, seemed to some like the scar left by Atlantis's fall. In the cold depths, volcanic ridges and submerged plateaus whispered of continents broken and drowned. The imagination of explorers filled in the rest. Still, for every theory, there was a counterpoint. Geologists argued that the Atlantic Ocean had been shaped over tens of millions of years, far too slowly for a great island to have suddenly vanished. Archaeologists pointed out that no known artifacts, inscriptions, or ruins had ever been found that could be linked to such a civilization. But those who believed countered that the sea itself was the perfect vault, that its crushing pressure and shifting sands erased everything it took. Modern researchers began to approach the legend from another angle, that perhaps Atlantis was not one place, but many. That Plato's story might have been a tapestry woven from multiple sources: Egyptian flood myths, Minoan history, and distant memories of real cataclysms that reshaped human life at the dawn of civilization. Massive floods at the end of the Ice Age, when glaciers melted and seas rose hundreds of feet, could have inspired tales of a world drowned. Humanity, still young but already dreaming, would have remembered. In this way, the search for Atlantis became more than an archaeological pursuit. It became a reflection of ourselves. The line between science and myth blurred not because one was false, but because both sought the same truth: to understand where we came from and what we have lost. Perhaps the most haunting realization is that Atlantis never needed to exist for its story to be true. For every civilization that rises, one eventually falls, swallowed not by the sea, but by time. The waves may take the cities, the deserts may take the stones, but the memory remains, waiting to be rediscovered by those who still dare to believe that the past speaks in whispers beneath the surface of the world. Why does the story of Atlantis refuse to fade? Why, after thousands of years, do we still whisper its name, sketch its towers in our minds, and dream of its return? There are myths older than Plato's tale, legends richer in gods and monsters, yet none linger quite like this one. Atlantis holds a peculiar gravity, not only as a mystery of history, but as a mirror of human memory. It is a story of longing, of pride, of the fragile beauty of civilizations, and of the dream that somewhere, beneath the surface of the world, something magnificent still sleeps. Psychologists and storytellers alike have long tried to explain the enduring allure of Atlantis. Some say it speaks to a deep collective memory, a universal echo of ancient cataclysms that shaped the dawn of humanity. When the last ice age ended and seas swallowed vast stretches of coastal land, countless lives and cultures vanished without record. Perhaps our ancestors carried those memories forward, encoded not in books, but in myth. Atlantis, then, is not just a Greek story. It's the ghost of every city lost to flood, fire, or time. But there is more to it than loss. Atlantis also embodies the dream of perfection, a civilization that had everything: wisdom, power, harmony with nature, and beauty beyond compare. Plato described it as a place of gleaming temples, fertile lands, and noble people, ruled by divine kings descended from Poseidon himself. It was the utopia that every empire since has tried to rebuild, and the warning that every empire forgets. Because, according to Plato, the Atlanteans' downfall came not from weakness, but from arrogance. They grew greedy, ambitious, and corrupt. Their hubris angered the gods, who unleashed the sea to reclaim what humanity had abused. That balance between greatness and destruction gives the myth its haunting depth. Atlantis is not merely a legend of loss. It is a parable of human nature. We build, we rise, we conquer, and then, through pride or blindness, we fall. It is a story as old as civilization itself, and perhaps that is why it feels so real. Every age has its own Atlantis, the lost world it both mourns and fears becoming. Across the centuries, writers, artists, and dreamers have found themselves drawn to this paradox. Renaissance philosophers saw in Atlantis the reflection of a divine order, a golden age when knowledge and virtue guided humankind. In the 19th century, Theosophists reimagined it as the cradle of all human wisdom, a mother civilization whose survivors spread art, science, and language across the earth. Modern fiction transformed it again, from Jules Verne's underwater visions to the silver spires of science fiction's alien worlds, each version revealing as much about the age that retold it as about the myth itself. But beyond art and philosophy, Atlantis has a psychological gravity. It touches something primal in us, the yearning for what is lost, the ache for paradise remembered. Every person, in some way, carries their own Atlantis, a moment, a home, or a dream that slipped away, leaving only fragments and echoes. The story becomes a vessel for nostalgia, for wonder, and for the haunting idea that perfection, once found, cannot last. In a deeper sense, Atlantis represents the tension between knowledge and mystery. Humanity's relentless drive to uncover truth, to map every ocean floor, to name every star, is both our strength and our curse. Atlantis sits forever at the edge of that pursuit, a reminder that not everything can be measured or proven. Some mysteries endure because they are meant to. They give shape to our curiosity, purpose to our search. Without them, perhaps, the world would feel smaller, the seas less deep. And so, we continue to dream. We build submarines and satellites, comb the depths with sonar, and send probes across space, always searching for the lost, the hidden, the forgotten. Atlantis has become a symbol of that eternal quest, the desire to understand where we came from, and the hope that somewhere, beyond what we can see, lies the truth of who we are. In the end, the legend of Atlantis survives not because it was real, but because it is true, true to our nature, our history, and our hearts. It is the song of a civilization that may never have existed, yet somehow lives within us still, an echo beneath the waves, calling us to remember, to dream, and to listen. As centuries passed, the legend of Atlantis did not fade into silence. It deepened, multiplied, and scattered like echoes across time. From ancient Greece to the modern world, countless men and women have set out to find the lost island, driven by wonder, ambition, and obsession. Some sought glory, others truth. Yet all were haunted by the same impossible dream, that somewhere beneath the waves, a forgotten world still waited to be found. The first great modern searchers emerged during the age of exploration, when the maps of the world were still being drawn and the boundaries of myth and geography blurred. The Renaissance had revived Plato's words, and explorers, with compass and cross, believed they might finally uncover what the ancients only imagined. As Columbus crossed the Atlantic, many whispered that he sought not India, but Atlantis itself. In the jungles of the New World, in the mountains of Peru, in the depths of the Caribbean, they saw signs, golden cities, vanished kingdoms, ancient ruins swallowed by the earth, and each was claimed, for a moment, to be the lost empire of the sea. By the 19th century, Atlantis had captured the imagination of a new kind of seeker, the scholar-dreamer. In dusty libraries and candlelit studies, men like Ignatius Donnelly pored over ancient texts, determined to prove the legend real. Donnelly's 1882 book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, would ignite a fire that still burns today. He argued that Atlantis was the source of all ancient civilizations, that from it came the arts, sciences, and gods of Egypt, Greece, and the Americas. His words were bold, almost prophetic, and they spread like wildfire. The world wanted to believe. In the years that followed, a wave of adventurers, mystics, and pseudoscientists joined the hunt. The lost continent was placed everywhere, from the icy peaks of the Andes to the depths of the Atlantic Ocean, from the Sahara Desert to Antarctica itself. Every discovery, every ruin, every unexplainable artifact became evidence. It was as if humanity, in its hunger for meaning, could not bear the thought that such grandeur had never existed. Yet even among the dreamers, deception found its way. Con artists and visionaries blurred the line between faith and fraud. False maps, forged tablets, and Atlantean relics were sold to museums and monarchs, feeding both curiosity and corruption. The world was captivated by the idea that truth might be hidden just out of reach. Atlantis became less a place and more a mirror, reflecting both the nobility and the folly of those who sought it. The 20th century brought new tools to the quest. Science joined the search, with submarines and sonar scanning the ocean floor. In 1969, explorers found mysterious stone formations off the coast of Bimini in the Bahamas, massive rectangular blocks that some claimed were the remains of Atlantean walls or roads. Scientists called it a natural formation. Believers saw ancient masonry. The debate, as always, only fueled the myth further. In Greece, archaeologist Angelos Galanopoulos argued that Atlantis was none other than the island of Santorini, once home to the Minoan civilization, destroyed by a volcanic eruption around 1600 BC. The parallels were striking. A powerful maritime culture, a sudden cataclysm, a city buried beneath ash and sea. For a time, this theory seemed to bridge myth and history, giving Atlantis a place on the map. Yet, like every claim before it, certainty slipped away with the tides. The searchers of the modern age became as much philosophers as explorers. Jacques Cousteau dove into the Aegean, scanning the sea floor for clues, but emerged not with ruins, but reflections on the nature of myth itself. He called Atlantis a dream of humanity's past, a dream that tells us who we wish we were. Satellite imaging, deep-sea mapping, and even artificial intelligence have since scanned nearly every corner of the globe, yet the island remains elusive, perhaps deliberately so. What makes Atlantis eternal is not its discovery, but its refusal to be found. Every age reinvents it, reshaping the lost city in its own image. To the Victorians, it was a symbol of moral decay. To the mystics, a cradle of enlightenment. To modern scientists, a puzzle of geology and memory. The more we search, the further it drifts, like a mirage on the horizon. And perhaps that is its purpose. For in the endless pursuit of Atlantis, humanity reveals its truest nature, not as conquerors of the sea, but as dreamers chasing reflections in the deep. It is the search itself, not the finding, that gives meaning. The longing for Atlantis is the longing for something purer than ourselves, a time when knowledge, beauty, and mystery lived in perfect balance. Even now, deep beneath the waves or far beyond the stars, the story calls to us. Maybe Atlantis is not lost, only waiting, for when we are ready to understand what it was never meant to hide. Every enduring legend begins with a fragment of truth, a memory carried across generations, reshaped by time, fear, and longing. For some, Atlantis is not a myth at all, but a memory, an echo of ancient civilizations that rose and fell long before written history began. Beneath the embellishments and divine retribution, they argue, lies a recollection of a real people, a real catastrophe, and a real loss that scarred humanity's early imagination. The question has haunted thinkers for millennia. Was Atlantis a fable or a faded reflection of something that truly was? Many scholars turn their eyes to the Aegean, where the island of Thera, modern Santorini, still bears the scars of one of the greatest volcanic eruptions in human history. Around 1600 BCE, a cataclysm tore the island apart, sending shockwaves across the Mediterranean. The Minoans of Crete, a flourishing maritime civilization with palaces, frescoes, and vast trade networks, were devastated. Their ports were buried in ash, their fleets consumed by tidal waves. To later generations, the tale of a powerful island kingdom destroyed in a single day and night could easily have been born from this memory. Plato's words, once metaphor, may have preserved the echo of a real apocalypse. Others look eastward to Egypt, the wellspring of so many ancient stories. It was there, Plato said, that Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, first heard of Atlantis from priests who claimed the tale was already 9,000 years old. Could the Egyptians have preserved records of forgotten lands beyond their shores, remnants of civilizations erased by flood or fire? Egypt's own history of inundation and rebirth, shaped by the Nile's eternal rhythm, was filled with myths of lost realms and drowned worlds. The priests might not have been recounting fiction, but fragments of collective memory carried from a time when rising seas swallowed coastlines across the globe. Farther still, across oceans and continents, lie cultures whose myths tell eerily similar tales, of golden ages ended by divine wrath, of cities beneath the sea, of gods who taught knowledge and then vanished. The Maya spoke of a great deluge that reshaped the world. The Sumerians told of Eridu, the first city, destroyed by flood. In Hindu scripture, the city of Dwarka was said to have sunk beneath the waves. Were these separate creations of the human imagination, or distant echoes of one shared ancestral event? When early humanity faced nature's fury and tried to give meaning to its loss. Some modern scientists have entertained this possibility. Geological records reveal that between 10,000 and 8,000 BCE, the very time Plato's priests claimed Atlantis vanished, massive floods reshaped the earth. Ice sheets melted, seas rose hundreds of feet, and entire coastlines disappeared. The Black Sea may have filled in a sudden surge. Fertile lands in the Persian Gulf may have drowned beneath encroaching tides. To the people who lived through it, these were not abstract geological events, but world-ending calamities. Memory would turn disaster into myth, myth into legend, legend into Atlantis. And yet, there is something more profound at play. Whether Atlantis was Santorini, or Crete, or a continent lost to the ocean's depths, the myth has survived because it speaks to a truth beyond geography. It is a story of human pride, brilliance, and fragility of a civilization that reached too high, only to be reminded of its limits. Every age has its own Atlantis, a vision of perfection undone by its own excess. The ruins change, but the lesson remains. In this way, the tale of Atlantis belongs not to history, but to humanity itself. It whispers of our oldest fear, that nothing, no matter how grand, is eternal, and our oldest hope, that even in destruction, memory endures. The myth persists because it resonates with the rhythm of life itself. Civilizations rise, flourish, and fall. The ocean takes, but it also remembers. Beneath its shifting surface lie the bones of worlds once real, their stories refracted through time like light through water. And perhaps that is the secret. Atlantis is neither myth nor memory, but both, a story that bridges the space between what we know and what we dream. Whether it existed as an island or as an idea, its legacy is undeniable. For every time humanity builds, creates, and reaches for greatness, the echo of Atlantis stirs beneath the waves, reminding us that even the brightest lights must one day sink into the sea. For Plato, Atlantis was more than a story of wonder. It was a mirror, a reflection of humanity's eternal struggle between wisdom and ambition, balance and excess. When he first spoke of it, around 360 BCE, his purpose was not to entertain, but to teach. The tale appears in two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, where he describes an ancient empire blessed by the gods, radiant in beauty, wealth, and knowledge, and yet doomed by its own arrogance. In the mind of the philosopher, Atlantis was not just a lost island. It was the soul of mankind, glittering with promise yet shadowed by pride. Plato said that the Atlanteans once lived in harmony with divine virtue. They honored the gods, respected justice, and used their vast power wisely. Their capital was a marvel, concentric rings of land and water, bridges and canals glistening under the sun, temples crowned in silver and gold. But over time, as comfort replaced humility, the people began to crave more. They turned outward, conquering neighbors, chasing wealth, and forgetting the sacred laws that had sustained them. Their hearts hardened, their ambition grew, and their empire, once a beacon of balance, became a symbol of corruption. Then, in one terrible night of fire and flood, the sea reclaimed what human greed had stolen. Atlantis, the city of perfection, vanished beneath the waves. To many modern ears, Plato's story sounds like fantasy, yet his purpose was deeply moral. He used Atlantis as a counterpoint to Athens, his own city, which he saw as drifting dangerously close to the same fate. After the Peloponnesian War, Athens had lost its virtue in the pursuit of empire. It was brilliant, creative, and proud, but pride had nearly destroyed it. Through the parable of Atlantis, Plato offered a warning. No civilization, no matter how advanced, could survive if it abandoned wisdom for power. To him, the fall of Atlantis was not ancient history, it was prophecy. Some of his students, and later philosophers, took the message further. They saw in Atlantis a reflection of the human condition itself, the endless cycle of creation and destruction that defines our story. We build, we rise, we dominate, and then, inevitably, we crumble. The myth endures because it speaks not of one city, but of all cities, of every empire that forgets the balance between progress and humility. In this sense, Plato's island was not lost to time. It was reborn again and again, each time humanity reached too far. And yet, there is something hauntingly beautiful about Plato's Atlantis. In his vision, the destruction was not merely punishment, it was renewal. The sea's swallowing of the island was an act of purification, washing away arrogance and restoring order to the world. It reminds us that nature, like truth, always reclaims what is hers. The gods, in Plato's telling, were not cruel, they were just. They gave humanity the greatest gift of all, the chance to remember, to learn, to begin again. Thousands of years later, as explorers and scientists chased the ghost of Atlantis across oceans and deserts, Plato's true message often drifts beneath the surface. He was not giving directions to a lost continent. He was mapping the geography of the human soul. His story asks us not where Atlantis was, but when it will rise again. Not in stone and marble, but in spirit, in the next great civilization that dares to build without wisdom. So, as we drift through the quiet waters of this tale, we begin to see what Plato may have seen. Atlantis is not lost. It lives wherever human ambition burns too brightly. It lives in our cities, in our empires, in our hearts. And perhaps, just perhaps, its greatest lesson is this, that every fall is also an invitation to rise, if only we remember what was drowned. The centuries after Plato's telling of Atlantis gave rise to one of the most enduring obsessions in human history, the search for a paradise lost. His words, passed from scribe to scholar, from library to legend, sparked questions that still echo through the ages. Was Atlantis real? Where did it lie? And could it still be waiting beneath the waves? In the dim candlelight of medieval monasteries, monks copied Plato's Timaeus and Critias by hand, uncertain whether to treat them as history or parable. Some whispered that Atlantis had been destroyed as divine punishment, a story meant to remind humanity of the flood in Genesis. Others argued it was a memory, an echo of some long-vanished age, preserved in myth. Then came the Renaissance, when curiosity bloomed like spring after 1,000 years of frost. Scholars rediscovered the ancient texts, and suddenly, the lost island was no longer a metaphor. It was a mystery waiting to be solved. The age of exploration brought new winds to the legend. When Columbus crossed the Atlantic, many believed he was sailing toward the lands of Atlantis itself. The discovery of the Americas, vast, beautiful, and unknown, seemed to confirm what Plato had written. Perhaps the island had not sunk, they thought, but survived across the sea. Maps from the 16th and 17th centuries marked strange, circular islands labeled Atlantis or Antilia, places that blurred the line between geography and imagination. Explorers returned from the Caribbean with tales of golden cities, strange ruins, and people who spoke of ancient floods that had wiped out entire worlds. The story grew darker and stranger as centuries passed. In the 19th century, as archaeology blossomed, writers like Ignatius Donnelly reignited the flame of belief. His book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, claimed that every ancient civilization, Egypt, Greece, even the Americas, had roots in Atlantis. According to him, it was the cradle of human knowledge, destroyed in a cataclysm that reshaped the world. His theories spread like wildfire, inspiring scientists, mystics, and dreamers to search every ocean and desert for clues. Some looked to the Mediterranean, to the island of Santorini, where the Minoan civilization vanished in a volcanic explosion around 1600 BCE. The blackened ruins, buried in ash, seemed to match Plato's vision, a rich, advanced society destroyed by fire and sea. Others turned their gaze westward, across the Atlantic, to the Azores, a chain of islands rising from the ocean's depths, as if remnants of a sunken continent. Still more searched the coasts of Spain, Morocco, and even Antarctica, weaving new theories from fragments of myth and geology. The mystics joined the hunt too. In the early 20th century, the American psychic Edgar Cayce claimed that Atlantis had been a continent stretching across the Atlantic, destroyed by misuse of powerful technology. He spoke of crystal energy, lost machines, and souls reincarnated from that vanished world. His visions painted Atlantis not as a ruin, but as a warning, a civilization undone by its own genius. Millions believed him. To this day, seekers travel to the Bahamas, to Bimini Road, to underwater plateaus and stone formations, convinced that the ghosts of Atlantis sleep just beneath the waves. What drives this obsession? Perhaps it is not the desire to find Atlantis, but to prove that such perfection once existed, that humanity once touched something greater. The search has never been about location. It has always been about longing. A longing for a time when the world was new, when gods walked among mortals, and when knowledge was still sacred. Atlantis, in that sense, is less a place than a promise, a reminder that even in loss, we are drawn toward light. The waves have not yielded their secret, but the search goes on, through sonar scans and satellite images, through dreams and theories whispered across centuries. And maybe that's the real magic of Atlantis. It survives not in stone, but in imagination. A city that refuses to stay buried, because we, too, refuse to stop believing. As the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the search for Atlantis stepped out of the pages of myth and into the quiet hum of laboratories and research vessels. The Age of Reason had inherited a legend, and though many scientists dismissed it as mere allegory, others couldn't help but feel the pull of mystery beneath the waves. The ocean still hides more than 90% of its secrets, and in that blue silence, some wondered, could fragments of Atlantis still rest beneath the silt of forgotten seas? In the decades after World War II, as sonar technology advanced, oceanographers began to map the seafloor with unprecedented precision. What they found was a world more alien than anyone had imagined. Mountains taller than Everest, trenches deeper than any canyon, vast plains of volcanic rock stretching across the abyss. Amid those discoveries came strange anomalies, symmetrical ridges, geometric patterns, and sunken formations that stirred the imagination. Every scan that revealed an unnatural shape, every blurred sonar image that hinted at structure, revived whispers of Plato's island kingdom. Some scientists turned to the Mediterranean, drawn by geological evidence linking Atlantis to the eruption of Thera, modern Santorini. Around 1600 BCE, a colossal volcanic blast tore the island apart, sending tsunamis crashing into Crete and coating the Aegean in ash. The Minoan civilization, so advanced in architecture, art, and trade, fell into ruin soon after. To many, it seemed the perfect echo of Plato's tale, an island empire lost to the sea in a single day and night. Archaeologists uncovered frescoes of ships and palaces buried in ash, and for a moment, it felt as if myth and memory had converged. Yet others argued that Atlantis must have been larger, farther, and older. In the deep Atlantic, near the Azores, explorers found strange plateaus and ridges, remnants of volcanic activity where land once may have stood. Some claimed these were the last peaks of a drowned continent. Expeditions to the Caribbean revealed massive underwater stone formations, like Bimini Road in the Bahamas, rectangular blocks laid with eerie precision. While most scientists attributed them to natural erosion, believers saw them as the ancient highways of a lost world. Modern researchers began to take a different approach. Using satellite imaging, sonar mapping, and underwater drones, they charted coastlines once above sea level during the last ice age. They found that thousands of years ago, when the seas were lower, vast areas of the continental shelf were dry land, fertile plains now hidden beneath the ocean. It was possible, they realized, that Plato's story preserved a memory of one of these vanished coasts, drowned when glaciers melted and the waters rose. If so, Atlantis wasn't a single island, but one of many civilizations erased by time's rising tide. In recent decades, scientists have uncovered ruins off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean, each buried beneath layers of sediment and coral. Some, like the Yonaguni Monument off Japan's coast, display stepped terraces and angular lines that defy easy explanation. While mainstream archaeologists remain cautious, these findings remind us how much of human history may still lie hidden beneath the deep. The ocean, after all, is both cradle and grave. It gives life, and it swallows it whole. Still, the mystery endures. For every skeptic who calls Atlantis a parable of pride, there is a dreamer who believes it was real, that somewhere, in a forgotten trench or sunken plain, the remnants of its marble towers still sleep. The modern search has shifted from myth to data, but the yearning remains the same. It is the desire to uncover a story older than memory, to prove that humanity's greatness did not begin with history, but long before it, in a world now drowned by time. And perhaps that's why Atlantis will never truly be found. Because Atlantis, as much as it is a mystery of stone and sea, is also a mirror, reflecting our own endless hunger for meaning, for knowledge, for something more. It's the promise that somewhere, deep below the surface, lies not just a lost city, but a lost truth, one that connects the human spirit to the vast and eternal rhythm of the ocean itself. To truly understand Atlantis, one must return to its source, not to the sea, but to the words of a philosopher. When Plato first described Atlantis in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, he did not present it as mere myth or history, but as a lesson. He wrote not as a geographer, but as a thinker shaping a parable about power, virtue, and the nature of civilization. For Plato, Atlantis was a mirror held up to humanity, reflecting both its brilliance and its flaws, its potential for greatness and its inevitable descent into pride. In his telling, Atlantis was once a land blessed by the gods, fertile, radiant, and abundant beyond measure. Its people, born of divine and mortal blood, lived in harmony, guided by wisdom and moderation. Their cities gleamed with orichalcum, their temples were adorned with gold, and their laws upheld balance and justice. For a time, they lived as the ideal society Plato dreamed of, one ruled not by greed or impulse, but by reason and moral order. Yet over generations, that divine spark dimmed. The Atlanteans grew enamored with wealth, conquest, and luxury. They began to measure greatness not in virtue, but in power. And so, as their ambition outpaced their wisdom, they became corrupt, and in that corruption, they sealed their fate. The gods, seeing the decay of their once favored children, withdrew their blessing. The earth itself, as if reflecting the moral collapse of its people, trembled and turned against them. The seas rose, storms gathered, and in one night of fury, Atlantis was swallowed whole. To Plato, this was not just a story of destruction. It was an allegory for every empire that ever strayed from the path of balance, for every nation that allowed arrogance to eclipse justice. It was the cycle of civilization itself, the rise through virtue, the fall through pride, the silence that follows. Scholars have long debated whether Plato invented Atlantis entirely or drew from older traditions passed down from Egypt and beyond. Some believe he reworked ancient flood myths, echoes of real cataclysms remembered by humanity's ancestors. Others see it as pure philosophy, a political allegory comparing Atlantis to Athens, meant to warn his fellow citizens of the dangers of moral decay. But perhaps it is both, a truth clothed in symbol, history wrapped in metaphor. The story resonates because it speaks to something timeless in the human condition, our desire to build, to rule, to transcend, and our tendency to forget the humility that sustains us. Plato's Atlantis was not just about a lost island. It was about the fragility of human order. Even the most enlightened societies, he warned, could fall when reason gives way to excess. The gods did not destroy Atlantis out of vengeance, but to restore balance, to to remind mortals that nature and virtue are inseparable. In that sense, the flood that consumed the island is not just a punishment. It is a cleansing, a rebirth. What is drowned may one day be remembered, reshaped, and rebuilt. And so, the legend lingers, not because we believe in its literal existence, but because we feel its truth in our bones. Every generation, in its triumphs and downfalls, replays the myth of Atlantis in its own way. The city beneath the waves becomes a symbol for lost knowledge, forgotten wisdom, and the warning that progress without conscience leads to ruin. When we speak of Atlantis, we are speaking of ourselves, our civilizations, our ambitions, our fears. We build towers to the sky, dig deeper into the earth, sail farther across the stars, and still, the lesson remains. Greatness without virtue is fragile, and wisdom forgotten is wisdom lost. Perhaps Plato never meant for Atlantis to be found, because it was never a place to begin with. It was an idea, a mirror, a whisper reminding us that all empires, no matter how grand, exist only as long as they remember the gods within themselves. And as the tides of time rise and fall, that whisper still drifts across the sea of human memory, gentle, eternal, and filled with the soft echo of a city that once dreamed too brightly. Long before Plato's quill etched the name Atlantis into human memory, stories of floods, sunken lands, and divine wrath flowed through the veins of countless ancient civilizations. Across continents and centuries, from the river valleys of Mesopotamia to the rainforests of Mesoamerica, humanity has remembered, in dreams, in myths, in sacred verses, the sea that once rose and swallowed the world. The tale of Atlantis may have been born in Greece, but its spirit drifts like a timeless current through every culture touched by the ocean's breath. In Sumer, the world's first known civilization, the Epic of Gilgamesh spoke of a great deluge that erased humanity, save for one man, Utnapishtim, chosen by the gods to survive and begin anew. The story would later echo in the Hebrew Bible's tale of Noah, and in the flood myths of India's Satapatha Brahmana, where Manu, the primordial man, was warned by a divine fish of the waters to come. Far to the east, in China, ancient chronicles told of Emperor Yu taming the raging floods sent by heaven, a tale not of destruction, but of renewal and mastery over chaos. And in the Americas, the Maya, the Hopi, and the Aztec all spoke of worlds washed away, of humanity reborn after the waters receded. These legends, scattered like driftwood across time, all share a haunting familiarity: divine judgment, human pride, survival, and rebirth. Whether literal or symbolic, they reveal something deep within the human psyche, a memory of catastrophe, a collective scar left by forces beyond control. For some, this shared memory hints at a real prehistoric flood, perhaps from the melting of ice sheets at the end of the last ice age, when seas rose and swallowed coastlines, erasing entire communities whose ruins now lie hidden beneath the waves. Could Atlantis, then, be one of these lost coastal kingdoms, its story preserved and reshaped by time? Modern archaeology has uncovered tantalizing clues. Submerged ruins off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean suggest that ancient peoples indeed lived closer to the shifting seas than once believed. Some scholars point to the destruction of Thera, modern-day Santorini, where a volcanic eruption around 1600 BC devastated the advanced Minoan civilization. Ash darkened the skies, tidal waves reshaped the Aegean, and cities crumbled beneath the weight of fire and water. The Minoans, like Plato's Atlanteans, were seafarers, traders, and engineers of remarkable skill. Could their sudden fall have inspired the philosopher's tale, passed down through oral memory and myth until it transformed into legend? Yet the story of Atlantis transcends any single catastrophe. It resonates not because it explains a geological event, but because it speaks to something spiritual, a longing for the lost, for the perfect world that slipped through our fingers. The flood becomes a symbol of both judgment and mercy, a reminder that creation and destruction are inseparable forces in the rhythm of existence. For every Atlantis that sinks, a new civilization rises from the depths, reborn and reshaped by memory. Even today, when satellites map the ocean floor and science claims to know every current, we still feel the lure of the unknown. The sea calls to something ancient within us, the part that remembers when our ancestors watched the waters rise and felt both terror and awe. When waves crash against the shore, we are listening to the same heartbeat that carried the myths of Utnapishtim, Manu, and Noah through millennia. In those echoes, Atlantis lives not as a place, but as an idea, an eternal reminder that beneath the calm surface of the world lies the deep, unyielding memory of what has been lost. And so, as night falls and the mind drifts into dreams, one can almost hear the murmur of those forgotten shores, whispers of temples, drowned in silence, of cities glimmering beneath moonlit waves, of a people who reached too high, too soon, and became legend. The sea remembers everything. Its tides are the breath of time, and in their endless rhythm, the story of Atlantis continues, not as a ruin to be found, but as a truth to be felt. Ever since Plato first spoke of the island that vanished beneath the sea, humanity has been unable to let it go. The words of the philosopher, that Atlantis lay beyond the pillars of Hercules and disappeared in a single day and night of misfortune, have kindled centuries of imagination, obsession, and wonder. Kings, explorers, scientists, and mystics have all chased the shadow of Atlantis, believing that if they could just find its ruins, they would unlock not only a piece of lost history, but perhaps the secret to humanity's forgotten greatness. In the Renaissance, when old manuscripts resurfaced and the classical world was rediscovered, Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, were read with new eyes. Scholars debated whether his story was allegory or history, while cartographers began marking speculative islands on their maps. The New World, newly reached by Columbus, fueled the flames even further. Some believed that Atlantis had been the Americas all along, a land across the ocean filled with wonders unknown to Europe. In the 17th century, the English philosopher Francis Bacon even wrote The New Atlantis, imagining a utopian society founded on wisdom and science, a vision of what humanity could achieve if it learned from its lost ancestors. By the 19th century, with the rise of archaeology and geology, Atlantis became more than myth, it became a challenge. Adventurers scoured the Atlantic and Mediterranean, confident they were on the brink of discovery. One of the most influential seekers was Ignatius Donnelly, an American congressman whose 1882 book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, proposed that all ancient civilizations, from Egypt to the Maya, had sprung from this single vanished source. His words ignited a new age of speculation, linking Atlantis to every mystery the world could not yet explain. In the 20th century, the search dove deeper, quite literally. As technology advanced, oceanographers mapped the seafloor, scanning the depths for anomalies. Expeditions in the Azores, the Caribbean, and even Antarctica claimed to find traces of roads, walls, and pyramids hidden beneath the waves. Sonar images of curious shapes sparked sensational headlines. Lost City found beneath the Atlantic. Each time, hope rose and fell like the tide, replaced by new theories that Atlantis was Santorini, Crete, the Canary Islands, or even the frozen expanse of Antarctica before the ice. But not all searches were driven by science. The myth drew mystics, spiritualists, and writers who saw Atlantis not as a lost land, but as a lost wisdom. The American clairvoyant Edgar Cayce, known as the Sleeping Prophet, claimed in the 1930s that the Atlanteans were an advanced civilization destroyed by their misuse of energy, and that fragments of their knowledge would resurface in the modern age. His prophecies inspired generations of believers who viewed Atlantis as both warning and promise, a mirror of humanity's potential for creation and destruction. Even today, despite centuries of skepticism, the mystery endures. In the digital age, satellites peer down at ocean floors, revealing strange geometric patterns that spark new debates online. Documentaries, novels, and films breathe life into the legend again and again, reimagining Atlantis as a city of light, a civilization of wisdom, or a cautionary tale of human arrogance. The line between history and myth blurs, but perhaps that is precisely what keeps Atlantis alive. It exists not just in the sea, but in the human spirit's endless desire to seek what lies beyond the horizon. To search for Atlantis, in truth, is to search for ourselves, for the balance between ambition and humility, knowledge and wisdom, progress and restraint. Every diver descending into the blue, every scholar poring over Plato's words, and every dreamer staring at the ocean's shimmering surface carries the same question in their heart. What if the world we lost was simply the world we are meant to remember? And so the quest continues, not only in laboratories or on sonar screens, but in the quiet spaces of imagination where myth and memory meet. The ocean keeps her secrets well, yet sometimes, when the waves are calm and the light fades just right, it feels as though she whispers back, reminding us that Atlantis may not be gone, only waiting to be seen again, in time, by those who truly listen. Before the waves rose to claim it, before the sea turned to silence, Atlantis was said to be a world of breathtaking perfection, a place where the divine and the mortal met beneath skies of gold. Imagine the first light of dawn spilling across vast marble terraces, bathing the towers of the city in a soft, honeyed glow. The air is sweet with the scent of sea salt and flowers that bloom only along the island's edges. From the harbor, the songs of fishermen echo faintly as sleek ships glide over calm waters, their sails reflecting the colors of the morning sun. This was the rhythm of life in Atlantis, ordered, graceful, and filled with purpose. At its heart stood the great capital, a series of concentric rings of land and sea, perfectly engineered by minds that seemed centuries ahead of their time. Wide canals sparkled between each ring, crossed by arched bridges of white stone. In the innermost circle stood the grand temple of Poseidon, god of the sea, patron of the island. Its walls shimmered with orichalcum, the fabled red metal that caught the sunlight like liquid fire. Statues of gods and kings lined its halls, their eyes carved with gems, their expressions eternal. Inside, the air was heavy with incense and the murmured prayers of priests who sought guidance from the deep. The people of Atlantis were said to be tall, strong, and radiant, not only in body, but in spirit. They were descendants of gods and men, a race blessed with intellect and skill beyond the ordinary. Their artisans carved intricate mosaics that told the story of creation and conquest. Their scholars charted the stars, and their philosophers spoke of the balance between heaven and earth. Music floated through the city, lyres, flutes, and soft voices harmonizing with the wind that drifted in from the sea. It was a society devoted to both progress and beauty, a realm where wisdom and ambition intertwined like the roots of an ancient tree. Beyond the city walls, fertile fields stretched toward distant mountains, irrigated by canals that shimmered under the midday sun. Farmers tended their crops in rhythm with the tides, while herds of shining cattle grazed on emerald pastures. Traders from distant lands docked their ships in the Atlantean ports, bringing spices, gold, and exotic animals. In return, they carried home tales of a city so magnificent that it seemed impossible, a place where streets were paved in marble and lanterns lit with captured starlight guided travelers through the night. But beneath this beauty, there was unease, a subtle shift in the spirit of the people. For generations, they had lived in harmony with the sea, honoring the gods who had given them their power. Yet with wealth came pride, and with pride came the slow forgetting of gratitude. The temples still burned with offerings, but fewer hearts bowed in humility. The kings of Atlantis, descended from Poseidon himself, began to see themselves not as servants of the divine, but as masters of the earth and sea. Their eyes turned outward, to conquest, to glory, to dominion over all who dwelled beyond their shores. Still, on the surface, the city shone. As the sun set over the ocean, Its light caught the tips of golden spires, turning them into pillars of flame. The people gathered in amphitheaters to celebrate feasts, to watch dances performed in honor of their ancestors. Children played beside fountains shaped like dolphins and lions, their laughter echoing through the colonnades. To an outsider, it was paradise, the perfect union of art, nature, and divinity. No one could have imagined that within a single day and night, it would all be gone. As darkness fell, torches flickered along the harbor walls, casting reflections that rippled across the water. The priests made their final offerings to the gods, unaware that the earth itself was stirring beneath them. And far out in the black depths of the sea, something ancient and restless began to move, the whisper of fate, the turning of time. Atlantis stood at the height of its glory, unaware that the dawn to come would be its last. It began not with thunder, but with a tremor, a shiver through the marble floors of the great temple. The priests paused mid-prayer, their voices caught in the air like birds startled from flight. Outside, the waves seemed to pull back from the harbor, exposing the sand and the glittering shells beneath. For a moment, the world held its breath. The city of Atlantis, glorious and unbroken for generations, stood suspended between heaven and ruin. Then the earth roared. The sound came from deep below, a guttural growl that split the foundations of the island. Statues cracked, walls crumbled, and the grand canals that had carried the lifeblood of the city turned to chaos as water surged and spilled through the streets. Fires broke out across the upper terraces, painting the night in shades of red and gold. The people of Atlantis, proud descendants of gods, now screamed in terror as their paradise began to die. From the temple of Poseidon, the high priest rushed into the square, his robes torn, his eyes reflecting the glow of flames. "The gods are angry," he cried. "We have forgotten our vows." His voice vanished beneath the roar of collapsing towers. The great golden statue of Poseidon toppled forward, shattering upon the steps, its trident spinning away into the smoke. It was as if the sea itself had risen to reclaim what once belonged to it. Winds howled through the city, carrying ash and embers. The mountains in the distance burst open with molten fury. Rivers of fire poured toward the sea, meeting walls of steam and thunder. The air grew thick and hot, filled with the taste of salt and smoke. In the harbors, ships were torn from their moorings and smashed against one another like toys in a storm. The once still water now rose in monstrous waves, black and gleaming under flashes of lightning. Families clung to one another as the ground split open beneath their feet. Some ran for the hills. Others prayed to the gods they had long neglected. But the gods did not answer. In the palace, the last king of Atlantis, descendant of Poseidon's line, stood on his balcony, watching his kingdom crumble. He whispered a single word, lost to the wind, before the palace walls split apart, swallowing him into the earth. The sky turned crimson as lightning arced across the clouds. Thunder rolled like the voice of judgment itself. The sea, once the giver of Atlantis's glory, became its destroyer. Wave after wave surged higher, smashing through the outer rings of the city. Marble colonnades fell like trees in a storm. The cries of the people faded into the endless roar of water. And then, as if the world had reached its limit of chaos, there came silence, a deep, hollow silence that swallowed everything. When dawn came, there was no dawn at all, only a gray horizon stretching where Atlantis had once stood. The sea rolled quietly now, as though nothing had happened. The towers, the gardens, the laughter, the light, all were gone. Only a few survivors clung to driftwood, weeping as they looked back toward the place that had been their home. The island that once touched the heavens now lay beneath the oceans. Heart, buried under miles of water and memory. Yet some say that on quiet nights, when the wind is soft and the moon full, a faint glow can be seen deep below the surface of the Atlantic, the last lights of Atlantis, still burning in defiance of time. Others whisper that the sea still carries the voices of its people, calling out to anyone who dares to listen. Atlantis had fallen, not by war, but by its own pride, its own forgetting of the balance between man and the divine. The sea had taken back what it had given, and though the island vanished, its story did not. It drifted across centuries, across continents, carried by sailors, philosophers, and dreamers who refused to let it die. The city was gone, but the myth endured, shimmering just beneath the surface, like sunlight through water. When the sea finally grew still, only silence remained, a silence so vast it seemed to swallow sound itself. The survivors floated on the wreckage of their world, their eyes wide and hollow as the horizon stretched endless and empty around them. Smoke still curled in the distance where fire met water, but Atlantis was gone, erased as though it had never been. In its place, the ocean rolled smooth and indifferent, hiding beneath its depths the ruins of marble temples and golden halls. Days turned into nights, and nights into a blur of hunger and grief. The survivors, fishermen, priests, servants, and nobles alike, drifted together toward distant shores, carried by the whim of the currents. Some found land, barren and unfamiliar, where they built small fires and spoke of their home in hushed voices, afraid that the sea might still be listening. They wrapped themselves in the tatters of silk and seaweed, mourning not just their dead, but the very idea of what Atlantis had been, a city that had once believed itself immortal. They told stories to keep the memory alive. Around those flickering fires, old sailors whispered that they had seen the gods themselves descend upon the city before it sank, radiant beings of light and thunder, reclaiming what mortals had defiled. Others insisted that Atlantis had not been destroyed at all, but merely hidden, cast beneath the ocean by divine will, preserved in a crystal dome where time itself could not reach. Perhaps, they said, the Atlanteans still lived there, walking through luminous streets of coral and gold, waiting for the surface world to remember them. But for most, survival was no myth. They built new lives upon strange shores, in islands scattered across the seas, in lands far to the east and west. They taught their children fragments of a lost tongue, songs that carried the rhythm of the waves and the echo of vanished temples. Some spoke of the great canal that had once divided the island's rings, or of the temple of Poseidon whose walls shimmered like moonlight. They carved spirals and concentric circles into the stones of their new homes, symbols of what had been and what was lost. These marks, scattered across the ancient world, would one day confuse and inspire generations to come. As centuries passed, the survivors' descendants merged into other peoples, the sailors of the Aegean, the builders of forgotten islands, the dreamers who spoke of lands that once lay beyond the Western Sea. The story of Atlantis became myth, its truth blurred by retelling. The once great city became a symbol, a warning, a memory fading like the last light of dusk. Yet it persisted, stubborn as the tide, whispering through time in fragments, in the words of poets, in the songs of mariners, in the dreams of those who gazed too long into the ocean. The silence of the sea became its greatest secret. Beneath the waves, where sunlight turns to twilight, the ruins of Atlantis slept. Pillars covered in coral, halls filled with drifting sand, statues staring into the darkness with unseeing eyes. Fish swam through broken archways, and seaweed curled over the remnants of roads once polished smooth by chariots of gold. The city had become one with the sea, not dead, but transformed. Nature had claimed it in the quietest of victories. Above, storms would come and go, ships would pass, and empires would rise, none aware of what lay hidden beneath them. And yet, sometimes, when the ocean grew calm and the moonlight rippled across the surface, a strange sound could be heard, the faint echo of bells, the whisper of distant voices, the murmur of a city dreaming beneath the waves. The sailors who heard it would cross themselves and look away, unwilling to meet the eyes of the deep. For in that silence was a memory too heavy to bear, the memory of a people who flew too close to divinity and fell not from the sky, but from grace. Atlantis was gone, yet in every whisper of the sea, in every wave that touches the shore, its story still breathes. Nearly 1,000 years after the last whisper of Atlantis faded from the lips of those who survived, its story began to resurface, not as a memory, but as an echo. It emerged from the ink and thought of one man, Plato. In the quiet halls of Athens, where philosophy danced between truth and imagination, Plato wove the legend into words that would outlast empires. His dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, were more than stories. They were mirrors reflecting the human soul, its pride, its curiosity, its longing to remember what the sea had taken. Plato claimed that the tale came from Solon, the wise lawgiver of Athens, who had heard it from Egyptian priests during his travels to the city of Sais. There, deep within the ancient temples, the priests had kept records far older than Greece itself. Stories of a mighty island empire that once ruled beyond the Pillars of Hercules, until greed and arrogance led to its downfall. Solon brought this tale back to Greece, but it was Plato who gave it form and voice. To him, Atlantis was more than a lost land. It was a parable, a reflection of humanity's eternal struggle between virtue and corruption. In Plato's words, Atlantis had been blessed by the gods, a land of divine beauty and boundless wealth. Its kings descended from Poseidon, lord of the sea, who built the island's heart in concentric circles of water and land, linked by golden bridges and silver canals. The Atlanteans were noble, wise, and just, but over generations, the purity of their spirit decayed. Power became greed, wisdom turned to ambition, and the divine spark that once guided them dimmed beneath the weight of pride. In their arrogance, they sought to conquer all who lived beyond their shores, and so the gods, seeing their hearts darken, struck them down. Plato described their fall in words as calm as they were devastating. In a single day and night of misfortune, Atlantis disappeared beneath the sea. Yet he left the tale open, a fragment, unfinished, haunting. Critias, the dialogue that told the story, ends abruptly, as if swallowed by the same waters that consumed the city itself. For centuries, scholars wondered whether Plato meant the story as truth or allegory. Was Atlantis real, a record of an ancient catastrophe passed down through whispers and fragments? Or was it philosophy clothed in myth, a warning about the dangers of human hubris and the fragility of civilization? To the Greeks, who had seen their own empires rise and crumble, the lesson was clear. Atlantis was both a place and a reflection, a mirror held up to every society that reached too far toward perfection, only to drown in its own brilliance. Plato's Atlantis lived not beneath the ocean, but in the human mind, eternal, shifting, elusive. And from his pen, the legend took root again, like a seed buried deep in time, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The centuries that followed would turn that seed into a forest of speculation. Philosophers debated, explorers searched, mystics dreamed. Some believed Plato's story encoded hidden truths, maps to forgotten worlds, or veiled accounts of real disasters. Others saw it as a mythic pattern, repeating throughout history wherever power overreached its bounds. Yet through every retelling, every theory, one truth endured. The idea of Atlantis spoke to something deep and restless within the human heart, the yearning for paradise lost, the desire to uncover the unreachable, the belief that somewhere, beneath the waves, lies the memory of a world better than our own. And so, Plato, philosopher, poet, and dreamer, became the unlikely cartographer of a land that might never have existed. With ink and thought, he redrew the map of human imagination, placing Atlantis not on the globe, but in the eternal ocean of wonder. Long before Plato's quill touched parchment, long before Greek ships traced the edges of the known world, there were the Egyptians, keepers of time, memory, and stone. Their civilization stood as an ancient mirror to eternity, watching the rise and fall of empires, their temples whispering secrets carved in hieroglyphs. It was here, among the shadowed halls of Sais, that Solon, the wise Athenian lawgiver, once stood, a man seeking knowledge older than his own city, perhaps older than Greece itself. The priests who welcomed him spoke softly, their words carrying the calm authority of those who had seen centuries pass like ripples across the Nile. And what they told him would echo through millennia. The tale of a mighty island kingdom that had once ruled the world, only to be swallowed by the sea. To the Egyptians, this was no myth. They told Solon that the story of Atlantis was history, not Greek, but far older, preserved in sacred texts that reached back 9,000 years before his time. You Greeks, one priest said, are like children. You have no ancient memory. The words humbled Solon, for he knew how fragile human remembrance could be. Floods, fires, wars, all could erase entire civilizations, leaving behind only fragments of legend. Yet Egypt, cradle of continuity, claimed to have watched those cycles repeat, to have seen the world renewed after every destruction. In their archives of stone and symbol, they remembered a world before the Great Flood, a world where the gods walked among men, and where Atlantis stood proud across the Western Sea. The priests described Atlantis not as fantasy, but as warning. They spoke of its circular city, its temples gleaming with orichalcum, its armies vast, and its fleets unmatched. But they also spoke of its arrogance, of kings who defied divine order and brought ruin upon themselves. The catastrophe that ended Atlantis, they said, was not punishment, it was consequence, nature reclaiming balance. The earth trembled, the sea rose, and in one night, the proud island sank beneath the waves. To the Egyptians, this was not mythic tragedy but cosmic rhythm, the eternal rise and fall that governed gods and men alike. Solon listened with awe, recording what he could. He recognized echoes of the great deluge stories told across cultures, the flood of Deucalion in Greece, the tale of Utnapishtim in Mesopotamia. Could they all be fragments of a single event, remembered differently by the peoples who survived it? Perhaps the Egyptians had not invented Atlantis, but merely remembered it longer than others. In their worldview, memory was sacred, not just recollection, but preservation of divine truth. To forget the past was to lose harmony with the cosmos. Thus, their retelling of Atlantis was not a story to entertain, but a warning to endure. When Solon returned to Greece, he carried the tale like an ember, a faint, glowing remnant of something ancient and immense. Yet he never finished his own account, leaving only fragments. It was Plato, generations later, who would fan that ember into flame, shaping it into a philosophical parable for the ages. But even as Plato gave Atlantis new meaning, the Egyptian connection remained a haunting mystery, a bridge between myth and memory, between recorded history and the whispers of something far older. Modern scholars have long debated what the Egyptians truly meant. Was the story of Atlantis a symbolic retelling of an ancient flood, perhaps one that destroyed early Mediterranean cultures? Or was it a dim remembrance of a civilization that predated written history, passed down through the long corridors of Egyptian timekeeping? Some have suggested that the priest's account might refer to the Minoans, whose advanced cities and sudden destruction by volcanic fire mirror the Atlantean fate. Others believe it was never meant to describe a place at all, but the eternal moral cycle: creation, corruption, collapse. Yet, even in skepticism, the tale retains its strange gravity. There is something profoundly human in the Egyptian insistence on remembering, on holding on to the story, even if its truth is uncertain. Perhaps that is why Atlantis endures, not because it was real, but because it represents the eternal struggle to keep the light of knowledge from sinking beneath the tides of time. And in the cool silence of the Temple of Sais, as Solon listened to the priests speak of ages drowned and forgotten, he may have understood this truth. The story of Atlantis was not just about a vanished island. It was about all civilizations, about the fragile brilliance of humanity and the waters that wait, patiently, to reclaim it. Imagine standing at the edge of an ocean that no longer exists, a vast expanse of water that once shimmered like liquid glass beneath the Atlantean sun. There, rising from the sea, stood a city unlike any the world had ever known. Atlantis was not built haphazardly. nor grown through centuries of trial and error. It was designed, deliberate, mathematical, almost divine in its symmetry. Plato described it as a series of concentric circles, alternating rings of land and water, connected by grand bridges and navigable canals that reach the sea like veins of civilization itself. From above, it would have appeared as a perfect mandala carved into the earth, the geometry of order, the architecture of cosmic balance. At the center of this circular design lay the heart of Atlantis, the great temple of Poseidon and Cleito, the divine couple from whom the kings of Atlantis claimed descent. The temple's walls were said to gleam with orichalcum, a mysterious red gold metal more precious than anything known to the Greeks. Statues of gods and bulls, fountains that glittered with light, and walls inlaid with ivory and silver surrounded the sacred space. At its core stood a colossal statue of Poseidon himself, a figure of immense power and serenity, driving 6 winged horses through the heavens, his eyes fixed upon the ocean he both ruled and feared. Around him burned 100 torches that never went out, their flames reflected in polished stone so that the temple seemed to glow with its own inner fire. The city surrounding the temple pulsed with life, merchants shouting from painted ships, artisans working bronze and crystal, philosophers debating beneath columned pavilions while children played beside the canals. The air carried the scent of salt, spice, and cedar, while music from flutes and lyres echoed off marble arches. Every street, every bridge, every wall was measured and balanced, for the Atlanteans believed harmony in architecture mirrored harmony in the soul. Even the waterways that separated the city's rings were no mere defenses. They symbolized the eternal flow between the mortal and divine, between sea and sky. Beyond the city core stretched vast plains, fertile lands crisscrossed by irrigation channels that glimmered like silver threads. Herds of sacred bulls roamed freely across meadows, while farmers tended golden fields of grain that fed the empire. In the distance rose mountains dense with forests, their peaks capped with snow even as the valleys below basked in warmth. Waterfalls cascaded from cliffs into clear blue basins where priests performed rituals to honor the elements. For in Atlantis, nature itself was divine. They built not to conquer the earth, but to coexist with it, believing the gods had given them a perfect land that reflected cosmic order. At night, the city transformed. The canals became ribbons of reflected starlight, and the towers shone like constellations brought down to earth. Lamps of glass and polished copper lit the promenades, their glow flickering across the water in rhythmic waves. The songs of sailors and poets drifted over the sea breeze, blending with the distant hum of the ocean. To those who gazed upon Atlantis from afar, it seemed alive, not a city of stone, but of spirit. Its beauty, Plato wrote, was beyond human description. But beneath that beauty lay something deeper, a tension between perfection and pride. For in their pursuit of balance, the Atlanteans began to believe they had achieved what even the gods could not: mastery over the elements. They carved the mountains to redirect rivers, dredged the ocean floor to expand their ports, and built walls so high they believed no storm could breach them. The city that had once mirrored the divine now sought to surpass it. It was as if the geometry that had once symbolized order had turned inward, folding upon itself in hubris. Still, for a time, Atlantis flourished, a utopia of wealth, wisdom, and wonder. Travelers who reached its harbors spoke of markets overflowing with gold and spices from lands unseen, of libraries that held the knowledge of worlds forgotten, of healers who could summon life from herbs and metals. It was a civilization in full bloom, radiant and unstoppable. Yet even as its brilliance dazzled the world, the first shadows had begun to stir beneath its shining waters. For perfection, when held too tightly, becomes fragile. And Atlantis, the city of circles, was about to feel the first ripple of the storm that would one day break its rings apart. The age that followed became known as the Golden Era of Atlantis, a time when the wisdom of the gods seemed to walk hand in hand with mankind. The Atlanteans believed they were not merely subjects of the divine, but stewards of creation itself. Their kings, descended from Poseidon and the mortal woman Cleito, ruled with a blend of spiritual guidance and temporal might. Each of the 10 royal houses governed a portion of the great island, bound together by law, blood, and reverence for the divine order. At the heart of their code lay a single belief, that harmony between nature, spirit, and knowledge would preserve balance forever. For centuries, it did. Atlantis was not a kingdom obsessed with conquest in its earliest days. Instead, its people pursued enlightenment through discovery. Scholars mapped the stars with instruments of bronze and crystal, charting constellations lost to modern memory. Mathematicians and architects spoke the same language, for to them geometry was sacred, the blueprint of the cosmos. The priests of the sun kept vast libraries inscribed with spiral symbols, said to contain the laws of the universe as whispered by gods. In the high observatories overlooking the sea, wise men recorded the movement of the planets and the tides, believing that all things, from the pulse of the ocean to the beat of the human heart, were part of one eternal rhythm. Medicine, too, was an art of divine resonance. The Atlanteans practiced healing through sound and vibration, crafting instruments of stone and metal that produced frequencies said to realign the body's inner harmony. They used plants unknown to modern botany, flowers that grew only on the sacred plains of the West, roots that glowed faintly under moonlight, blending them with alchemical precision. Their physicians were less doctors than philosophers of the flesh, seeing illness not as punishment, but as dissonance that could be brought back into tune. In their temples, pools of mineral-rich water reflected golden light as chants echoed through the corridors. Music and medicine intertwined. Trade and craftsmanship flourished alongside wisdom. Ships of sleek design, carved with protective runes, sailed beyond the horizon to distant shores, to Egypt, Iberia, even the misty islands of the north. From these journeys, they brought not only gold and spices, but stories, fragments of foreign myths that were woven into Atlantean lore. The people of Atlantis saw themselves as the nexus of the world, the place where knowledge converged like rivers into a single sea. Theirs was a civilization of shimmering light, one that believed it had transcended the limitations of mankind. Yet even amid such beauty and brilliance, cracks began to form. Power, once a sacred trust, grew intoxicating. The kings of Atlantis, wise though they were, began to envy the might of one another. The northern dominions, rich in minerals and forests, resented the tribute owed to the central palace. The southern provinces, blessed with fertile plains, sought greater autonomy. Slowly, the unity that had once defined Atlantis began to strain beneath the weight of pride. The priests warned of imbalance. They spoke of dreams in which the ocean itself whispered in sorrow, of stars shifting out of alignment. The harmony is breaking, they said. But their voices were drowned by the music of prosperity, by festivals that celebrated man's dominion over earth and sea, by rulers who saw themselves not as servants of Poseidon, but as his equals. Even the great temple of the sea god, once a place of humility, began to gleam with excessive splendor. Gold replaced stone, mirrors replaced water, and prayers turned to proclamations of glory. Still, for the common people, Atlantis remained paradise. Fishermen cast their nets in waters that never failed them. Farmers harvested crops that seemed to renew themselves. Artists carved marble that shimmered like living skin. The air itself seemed touched by perfection, fragrant, calm, eternal. To live in Atlantis was to live in the presence of gods. But the gods, it seemed, were watching. From the heavens above the great city of circles, Poseidon's gaze grew troubled. For what had once been a reflection of divine order had begun to twist into a reflection of human ambition. And in that subtle turning, in that near imperceptible shift from reverence to arrogance, the fate of Atlantis was sealed, though none yet knew it. The Golden Age continued, radiant and serene, like the stillness before a storm. The sea shimmered around the island, calm and endless, as if holding its breath. The Atlanteans dreamed of eternity, never realizing that time itself was already turning against them. As centuries passed, the light of Atlantis burned brighter, and then began to flicker. What had once been a kingdom of balance turned into an empire of desire. The Atlanteans, no longer content to live in harmony, turned their gaze outward with hunger. The sea, which had once carried their ships as a bridge of friendship, now bore the weight of fleets armed with bronze and flame. Their sails, once symbols of exploration, became banners of conquest. Across the known world, whispers spread, "Atlantis is coming." They subdued islands and coastal cities, demanded tribute from lands far beyond sight of their shores. Where once they traded as guests, they now ruled as masters. The golden ships returned heavy with spoils, silver from the north, slaves from the south, incense from the east. The gods who had once guided their hands now seemed distant, their temples filled not with prayer, but pride. The kings of Atlantis began to see themselves not as stewards of divine power, but as the very embodiment of it. They reshaped their laws to serve ambition, turning justice into vanity and peace into memory. Among the 10 royal houses, division deepened. Brothers warred with brothers, priests quarreled with kings. The Great Council, once a place of unity, echoed with accusation and deceit. Some still spoke of the old ways, of harmony, humility, and reverence. But their voices grew faint beneath the roar of celebration and the thunder of war drums. The city that had been built on sacred geometry now pulsed with the erratic rhythm of greed. Its streets glowed too brightly, its laughter rang too loudly. Even the ocean began to change. Fishermen spoke of strange currents and restless tides. High above the capital, in the temple of Poseidon, the priests performed the rites with trembling hands. The sacred water in the inner basin, which for generations had remained still as glass, now rippled without wind. The sea god's statue, once serene, seemed to glower in the flickering torchlight, his trident casting long, jagged shadows across the marble walls. Some claimed to hear a distant rumble beneath the earth, a deep, mournful sound, like a heart breaking beneath the waves. And yet, the kings ignored the warnings. They built higher, richer, grander. Towers touched the clouds, lined with gold and crystal. Gardens bloomed unnaturally, their flowers fed by strange alchemical waters. The people cheered as miracles became commonplace, rain summoned on command, light trapped inside glass. To the Atlanteans, these wonders proved their supremacy. But beneath their brilliance, something ancient and sacred had been forgotten. The humility that had once kept the island in harmony with the sea. It was said that on the final eve of peace, a voice echoed from the depths, neither storm nor wave, but something deeper. Some called it Poseidon himself. Others believed it was the voice of the ocean, ancient and wounded. It whispered through the harbors, carried by the wind. "You have taken what was never yours to command." Few heard it. Fewer listened. The revelry of power drowned all warnings. Then came the omens. The moon turned red. The tides withdrew from the shore as if in fear. Birds fled the island. The air thickened with a strange stillness. The high priests gathered at the temple steps, robes billowing in the eerie calm, and one by one, they knelt before the sea, praying not for victory, but for forgiveness. The people watched in silence, uncertain whether to laugh or tremble. But by dawn, the horizon darkened. A storm unlike any other began to form, silent at first, then roaring with a sound that split the heavens. The ocean rose, alive and furious. Lightning clawed at the sky, striking the golden towers that had once reached for the gods. The ground heaved beneath marble streets. Fountains burst open. Fire rained from the clouds. The laughter, the music, the endless pride, all were drowned beneath the sound of the sea reclaiming what it was owed. And as Atlantis began to sink, the people looked up to their gleaming temples, to their kings, to their gods, but no answer came. Only the relentless voice of the ocean remained. Some said they saw Poseidon's statue crumble into the waves, his eyes dark and cold. Others swore the island's heart glowed one last time before vanishing into the deep. When the sun rose, there was no Atlantis, only the endless sea, calm and gleaming, as though nothing had ever been.